Chapter 971. The cultivation circle in Chaotian had been working hard for the great formation of heavenly arrival more than 10 years ago, or rather, more than 10 days ago. The battleship that looked like a black coffin was advancing silently by the edge of the sea in nebula. The hole on the hull of the battleship looked rather gloomy under the stardust. The battleship had been shielded from the outside world the entire time. The two madmen had no idea what had happened on the moon-gazing planet, and they had no idea that Jing Jiu and the Snow Girl had finally shown themselves. Even if they knew what had happened, they wouldn't pay any attention to it. In their eyes, what they were going to do next was more important than anything else. This long voyage had lasted more than 20 days. Shen Yunmai had performed many surgeries on his brain and repaired it. Then, he used the materials and the machinery on the battleship to make a mechanical body made of all alloys for himself. He was about to finish the final assembly work. Tong Yen walked into the control room and put the bucket of water on the workbench. Looking at the head in the bucket, she couldn't help but remark, "Is it a bit too much?" After being repaired in the last few days, Shen Yunmai's head was not as dry as it had been at the beginning. The biomaterial had absorbed enough energy and nutrients, so it looked quite plump. His skin was white and rosy, looking like a peach. However, it looked a bit too much, and the skin was too thin. It looked like he had undergone plastic surgery. Shen Yunmai said expressionlessly, "I'm born with thick eyebrows. Don't envy me." Several extremely long mechanical arms reached out from the alloy wall, extremely gently holding his head, leaving the bucket and heading upward. There was a tall robot behind the workbench. It looked like a mecha, but its components didn't match with each other. It was evident that it was a temporary product. Shen Yunmai's head was placed in the specially built control room, which was in stark contrast to the huge body of the mecha. It looked ridiculous. The light blue electric arc generated on the legs of the robot along with the sizzling sound. Soon after, it formed a ring-shaped structure and moved upward, stimulating all the tiny components along the way. Pa! The shapeless electromagnetic wave echoed in the control room. Tong Yen felt a tingling sensation on her eyebrows, knowing that Shen Yunmai had completed the brain-computer connection. "My current feeling… I don't know how to describe it," Shen Yunmai's voice rang out from the head of the robot. Tong Yen said, "I thought you were used to it." Shen Yunmai retorted angrily, "Do you think that I would make such a pile of garbage for my body if I could?" Tong Yen said calmly, "Whether it's trash or good material, as long as it can move, it can satisfy your spiritual needs." This sentence sounded ordinary, but it was actually very profound. After thinking for a while, Shen Yunmai decided to respond in a new way, which came from an old movie. "You know what? The old man in my family has been semi-retired for the past few years. He doesn't have any hobbies, so he has been staying on the ancestral planet, digging up ruins everywhere, trying to find the roots of humanity. Not to mention, after digging for so many years, he actually managed to dig out something. Oh, I remember now. You've been to the old house and know about the museum." "Yes, I saw a lot of old things in the old house when I was young. When I say old things, I mean really old things, even older than the ancient civilization. At that time, there were already poems, long and meaningless stories, and a kind of movie that was similar to a cartoon. Yes, it was also called a movie. I read poems slowly, but I speed up when I read books and movies. I transmit the data directly to my consciousness, so I can finish a movie in 1 minute. When I was 11 years old, I read a movie called RoboCop on a cloudy evening. The movie was interesting, but generally it was boring. The reason why I'm talking so much nonsense now is that I want to tell you that my current brain and the body of this robot." He raised his thick and heavy mechanical arm and pointed at his swollen head in the control box, saying, "It's F***king similar to what I'm doing now. So, I'm in a very bad mood now. You'd better not talk to me in that mysterious language, because it will only make me more unhappy." Tong Yen listened to him quietly. She didn't give any response, but turned around and walked out of the control box. Shin Yunmai was taken aback for a moment, and then he maneuvered the giant robot to follow her out, making heavy footsteps all the way. The corpses in the battleship had been dragged to the bottom level by the cleaning robot, so he didn't have to worry that the robot would trample a rotten corpse into a meat pie. It was just like how the snow girl trampled a frozen pear on the windowsill of room 720. "Don't you have anything to say?" Shin Yunmai asked loudly. Tong Yen replied without turning her head, "You and Zhuoruzhui will become good friends." When they arrived at the control room in the deepest part of the battleship, the giant robot rudely lifted the cable pole and pulled out 2 cables to connect to the data inlet on its left shoulder, seemingly casually but actually accurately. Then he explained to Tong Yen, "It's more reliable to have a cable connection when we're doing a global match." Tong Yen didn't like the way the robot treated her as a primitive aborigine, so she didn't pay attention to him. It didn't take long for a series of urgent alarms to ring in the battleship. Then, the alarms disappeared abruptly and turned into electronic beeping sound. This is indeed the battleship of our Shin family. The computing core is pretty good and powerful. Shin Yunmai manipulated the robot to pull off the cables and made a few clumsy dance movements, saying, "Next, let me complete the super calculation that you country players can never do." Tong Yen looked at him expressionlessly and said, "You should compete with that computer if you're so capable." The giant robot froze. After a while, Shin Yunmai's voice rang out again, "I'll occupy her body one day. I'll rape her mentally. I'll own her. Then, I'll use her computing core to solve the ultimate problem of our universe." Tong Yen had no interest in this lunatic's fantasies. "Can you not be so noisy?" she demanded. "No, I can't," Shin Yunmai replied. A few days later, the Black Coffin battleship finally opened the composite plates covering the surface of the battleship according to the pre-calculated procedure. At the same time, the propulsion system and the remote positioning equipment were turned on. Looking at the star chart ahead, Tong Yen was certain that there was no problem with the route ahead. They would arrive at their destination after 2 more space jumps. Shin Yunmai had been modifying the robot in the control room over the last 2 days. It was unclear why he had such a high requirement for the appearance of the robot. A few days later, the Black Coffin battleship passed through a deserted space passage and arrived in an extremely remote region of stars. The permanent stars here were sparse, and the traces of the war in the distant ancient times could still be seen. It was not suitable for humans to live here, and it was impossible to develop it. Along with the heavy footsteps, the robot came to the control room. Together with Tong Yen, he looked at the monitor screen. A white permanent star hovered in the dark space ahead of them in silence. The permanent star looked so ordinary, devoid of any special feature, but it was special because it illuminated the void all the time. This was the sun that could be seen in Chaotian. "Where is Chaotian?" Shin Yunmai's voice trembled a bit. It was evident that it was not because of the amplification of the machine, but because of his mood. He was the perfect combination of the 2 civilizations, Chaotian and the Federation of the Milky Way. He had grown tired of the boring world of the Federation of the Milky Way, and he had been curious about and yearning for Chaotian since he was a child. As such, he liked wearing the ancient robe and playing the zither, his white cloth and long hair tousling. Today, he finally had the chance to see Chaotian in person. It was impossible for him not to feel excited. "It's over there," said Tong Yen while pointing at a spot. It was a long distance away from the white permanent star. It was a seemingly ordinary corner of the universe, just like the other places in the universe, a patch of nothingness. Shin Yunmai turned his head to look at the patch of nothingness. The ripples had gradually formed in his heart, and soon, the waves were surging violently. How did the white permanent star project itself into the patch of nothingness and become the sun? Why didn't any of the cocoon breakers dare come back here? Was the vague attractive force coming from the nothingness and the deep part of their spiritual souls the reason why the cocoon breakers were so afraid of Chao Tian? Since he learned of the existence of Chao Tian at a young age, he had many imaginations. After the conversation with Jing Jiu on Planet 857, those imaginations had gradually turned into more realistic conjectures. He thought that the world of Chao Tian might be in a black hole. The cultivation practitioners could come out because of a phenomenon similar to the radiation of the black hole. The reason the cocoon breakers didn't dare get close to the black hole was because they were worried that they couldn't withstand the gravitational force of the source, or they didn't dare leave like Bai Ren, or they went back like the disgraced fairy. As for why they couldn't come out after going back, it should be because the powerful gravitational field of the black hole interfered with the reorganization of the matter. However, the theory of the recombination was merely a hypothesis. He imagined Chao Tian to be a black hole. In a sense, it was the same as the ether in the ancient times. It was a last resort. He had finally seen the patch of nothingness that day. He was certain that it was not a black hole at first glance, because it had no horizon and no real gravitational force. The patch of nothingness was more like a foggy glass, or a dark region with a clear boundary. The sun was the projection of the permanent star in the dark region. To explain it in a more artistic way, the patch of nothingness was like a mirror of God, which could make everything reflected in it into a real existence. Of course, this was merely his hypothesis. Another possibility was that this dark region was a prison in the space created by a human being of a higher state a great many billions of years ago. As time went by, that civilization had vanished in the empty universe. This prison in the space had drifted for a great many years before it was discovered by that God. That God had used a certain method to enter this prison in the space. After he was certain that the dark energy couldn't break through the boundary, he transformed this prison into the ultimate shelter and laboratory for the humans, and put a great number of lives in it, including those modified animals that imitated the monsters of the sea of dark matter. Some of the modified animals had evolved into divine animals and left Chao Tian after breaking out of the prison. Some of them had evolved into the demons of the underworld and the inhabitants of the snowy kingdom. As for those humans, they had embarked on a completely different path of cultivation under such a special environment, growing stronger and stronger. Until now, the so-called heavenly punishment was probably the reflection of the self-generated defense force of this prison in the spiritual world of the intelligent beings. There was no whirlpool of thunder or lightning. It was merely an electric net. Chao Tian was right in front of him. Shen Yunmai was exceedingly excited. His brain was extremely active. In a short period of time, he had come up with 17 possible structures of the world. Then, he told Tong Yen about the 2 most plausible structures, hoping to hear his opinion. Tong Yen didn't have any opinion. Shen Yunmai remarked sentimentally, "Though you countrymen live a comfortable life, it's not a good habit to be unwilling to find out the truth." Tong Yen wondered why the cultivation practitioners on Chao Tian tried so hard to ascend if they didn't want to find out the truth. However, it was not always a good thing to think about something that was obviously beyond the knowledge and the upper limit of wisdom. It could make people feel hopeless and go crazy. It was the case for Shen Yunmai. The black battleship was getting closer and closer to the patch of nothingness. Since it was the patch of nothingness, it was impossible to determine the exact location. It was because there was a marker outside the patch of nothingness. It was an old bamboo chair. The bamboo chair hovered in the dark space in silence, receiving the light of the distant permanent star. It looked the same as before, but many details, including the structure of the bamboo fiber, had changed a great deal. To put it more precisely, it looked like a dried flower. Seeing the bamboo chair, Shen Yunmai suddenly recalled many scenes in the path toward heaven. "I want to sit on it," he exclaimed urgently. The first generation of this bamboo chair was made by Jingjiu in that small village, and most of the later generations were made by Lu Shisui. This bamboo chair had a special significance for the Aoyama sect and the cultivation circle in Chaotian. Jingzhou had spent most of his life on this bamboo chair. The snow girl had stayed on it for many years. Besides him, Zhao Leo was the only one qualified to sit on it. Well, there were also Ping Yongka, the idiot, and Zhuoruzhui, the shameless one. No matter what, Xin Yunmai still wanted to sit on the bamboo chair. It was like going to a famous scenic spot, but he couldn't take the cable car to the top of the mountain because of the strong wind. Looking at the stone monument with the name of the scenic spot at the foot of the mountain, he wanted to lean against it and take a picture. You can't sit on it. Do you want to put your head on it? Tong Yen shot him a glance as if she was looking at an idiot, reminding him, don't forget that those people all sat on it with their buttocks. It was like sticking a warm face to a cold buttocks with a bamboo chair, and time between them. Xin Yunmai snorted twice and said, I'd like to take it and have a look. As he said this, the battleship reached out its mechanical arm to take the bamboo chair back. Tong Yen disagreed, saying, Don't move it. The bamboo chair has its significance. Thinking that he couldn't sit on this bamboo chair, Xin Yunmai grew more dissatisfied with this heavy and bulky mechanical body. He was in a bad mood, retorting, It has no significance at all. It's a symbol, said Tong Yen. Xin Yunmai sneered, Nonsense. Don't talk about it with me. I've been studying the principles of philosophy since I was 5 years old. It's meaningless. Yes, Tong Yen said. No. Yes. No. Yes. The seemingly childish conversation was repeated many times. Xin Yunmai said in a mocking tone, I can prove that it's meaningless with countless theories and examples. Tong Yen said calmly, If I think it's meaningful, then it's meaningful. These were the two most important ways to understand the world. The argument between the two was of course not childish. After a moment of silence, Xin Yunmai asked, You said that the people inside would be prepared if they wanted to come out. How should we inform them then? There was a firm and unbreakable boundary between the two worlds. The boundary was not even a real boundary, but a natural line caused by the difference in the speed of light. The boundary could even prevent the transmission of information. However, there were ways to cross the boundary. For instance, Jingzhou could send some of the materials inside to the outside of Chaotian by employing the method of hiding the world. The Zhongzhou school had a special method to do so as well. The black battleship left the bamboo chair slowly and headed to another place with its back to the empty space. It didn't take long before the battleship arrived in the vicinity of a patch of scattered meteorite. Looking at that spot, Tong Yan's eyes suddenly glowed. It seemed that he had discovered something. He waved his hand in the air, and an ancient bronze mirror appeared in his hand, which looked similar to the green sky mirror. In the next moment, a gloomy and deep passage appeared in the bronze mirror. The clouds and fog drifted slowly, and the stone steps could vaguely be seen leading to the bottom. Seeing this, Tong Yen displayed a hint of nostalgia in his eyes. Xin Yunmai remarked in a mocking tone, You've just come out a few days ago, and you're already acting like this. Tong Yen didn't pay any attention to him. He looked at the bronze mirror in silence. It didn't take long before a bright red figure broke through the darkness and the clouds and fog, walking up the stone steps and getting closer to the mirror. Though Xin Yunmai seemed relaxed, it was actually the first time he had seen the scene in Chaotian. He was quite nervous and excited. It's coming! It's coming! Tong Yen still didn't pay any attention to him. When the red figure broke through the fog and came to the front of the mirror, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. It was a young woman in red clothing who came to the front of the mirror. She still had a trace of childishness in her eyes, as if she were full of energy and vigor. Chapter 972. Xin Yunmai couldn't hear the conversation between Tong Yen and the young woman. He looked at the two of them as if they had become two statues on either side of the mirror. It didn't take long for the silent conversation between the two of them to come to an end. Tong Yen blinked his eyes. The young woman in red had already gone to the bottom of the stone steps, her figure concealed by the clouds and fog. Shin Yunmai was aware that it was a kind of communication through the spiritual awareness. He couldn't help but feel a bit regretful. "Is she your daughter?" he asked curiously. "She's my personal disciple." "Why do you think she's my daughter?" Tong Yen retorted. Shin Yunmai pointed at his face. Tong Yen said in a low voice, "Her eyebrows are not light." Shin Yunmai said, "What I meant was that her face is very tender, similar to yours." "Are you free?" Tong Yen asked. "We only have half a day to calculate the boundary and the energy level." Having said that, he waved his hand slightly and threw the bronze mirror out of the battleship, disappearing into the midst of the meteorites. "Why didn't you keep it?" Shin Yunmai asked confusedly. Tong Yen said, "It's a rule passed down by the founding grandmasters. Only the sect master knows about it. Why should I tell you about it?" Shin Yunmai maneuvered the robot to walk toward a pillar. "I feel that you're not in a good mood right now," he said. "Let's talk about something else. I'm a sensible person after all. I'm afraid that I can't defeat you with my useless armor." The relationship between Tong Yen and Zhuoruzhui had always been bad when they were in Chaotian. It had something to do with what Lu Ci had done at the West Ocean, but more importantly, it was the difference in their temperament. Hearing Shin Yunmai's nagging, he seemed to see another Zhuoruzhui. "Hurry up," he said with furrowed eyebrows. Shin Yunmai said, "What's the hurry? Even if you can contact your disciples and ask them to come out, will they be able to do so? I don't believe in that formation." Tong Yen said, "The controller of the formation is Cain Yang." Shin Yunmai said, "In the book, she is at most the third smartest, not even as smart as you. So what if she is the host? The foundation of that formation is the smoke and cloud dispersing formation. When Taiping Zhenren designed this formation, he wanted everyone to ascend. Later, Zhenren Jingyang went to the Mirror Sect to study it for a long time. So, you can say that this formation was created by them," Tong Yen said expressionlessly. Shin Yunmai raised his mechanical arm, gave it a thumbs up and said, "Reliable." Before Tong Yen could respond, Jing Jiu continued, "You might not be familiar with the No Mercy sect, but do you know Enxing? This cocoon breaker is interesting. His personality is very tough, but his speech is very boring. His hand gestures are also very boring. He just gives a thumbs up, middle finger, peace sign, and so on." Tong Yen couldn't bear it any longer. She directly used a Dao art to seal her 6 senses and started meditating. Shin Yunmai felt bored when nobody responded to him. He had no choice but to walk to the front of the cylinder and connect to the battleship's computer system to calculate the data. The black warship had already flown to a certain location. The patch of nothingness was between the battleship and the distant permanent star. The gravitational lens at the head of the battleship had been extended out noiselessly, and dozens of the most advanced detectors were approaching the patch of nothingness cautiously. All kinds of data were being sent back. The light blue light was passing through all the components of the battleship, looking like the light on water. A great deal of information was passing through them, meeting each other, and then the result was calculated. Shin Yunmai was in charge of the whole calculation process, but most of the calculation was done by the computer on the battleship. His brain was idle in many areas. Why was he idle? It was indeed a troublesome matter. After a long while, Tong Yen opened his eyes slowly and woke up. He found that the calculation process had indeed sped up a lot, and he had already calculated a great deal of data. Shin Yunmai was extremely bored. Finding Jing Jiu had woken up, he said hastily, "Don't be hasty. Don't close your eyes again. I just thought of something." The expression on Tong Yan's face changed slightly as he asked, "What is it?" Shin Yunmai said, "Didn't I tell you a few days ago that I had watched many old movies on the ancestral planet in my old house?" Tong Yen uttered an "hmm." Shin Yunmai continued, When I was bored just now, I thought of the scene where you and your female disciple met through the mirror. I suddenly remembered a movie I watched when I was young. I forgot the name of the movie, and I didn't remember the story either. The only thing I could remember was that the sun was very strong and the mountain was very hot. Why did I remember this movie? Did you make it up? In the movie, a mother went to visit her son in prison. The mother and the son talked through the wire phone through the glass. The goose even said some numbers to a watch, just like the maid in another TV series I watched when she killed someone and reported the location. Then, they went back to the prison. I don't know whether it was the director's idea or I chose to pause the movie because I was in a hurry to pee. Anyway, they stayed still through the window for a long time, just like you did just now. There seems to be something wrong with the data. Tong Yen looked at him expressionlessly and said, "You have 1 standard hour at most. Do it quickly." "How dare you order me? You are a bit arrogant right now." Shen Yunmai's robot pointed the middle finger at Tong Yen. He suddenly looked up at the sky and said, I remember now. That brother thought he could fly for some reason, so he jumped out of the window. Unfortunately, he didn't manage to float up. He fell to the ground and died. Ping Yonka drifted up and stood in the sky. Those who should come had come, and those who should leave had come out. The peach petal was on the verge of falling down, and the great formation of heavenly arrival was about to be activated. "So few people?" A crisp and cold voice rang out. Everybody followed the voice and looked at the square in front of Shilai Peak. The pine trees on the square looked like the waves, similar to the sea of pine trees in the Guoqing Temple. Elder Xiang Wanshu of the Broken Stream Valley and dozens of highly achieved swordsmen of Zhongzhou School were standing there. A young woman in red clothing stood in the front of the crowd. Her eyes and brows were exceedingly beautiful, like the red leaves covering the mountains in autumn. Many people had guessed that she was the personal disciple of Tong Yen, the mysterious sect master of Zhongzhou School. Ping Yonka said, "It's not a small number." The young woman in red said expressionlessly, "My master said the more, the better. But you people have only brought a few guys here. How can I explain it to him?" Yuan Chu, his wife, and Cain Yang all had a high status in the cultivation circle, to say nothing of Su Zai, a big figure of the deviant sex, and Mr. Pengda. She dared use the word guys to describe them. Many practitioners of cultivation sects felt nervous, wondering if the two leaders of the orthodox sects would fight against each other again after a few hundred years of peace in Chaotian. Some disciples of Aoyama who didn't know the inside story yelled out, demanding the other party to take back what she said and apologize. The young woman in red said expressionlessly while looking at the disciples of Aoyama, "Shut up. Otherwise, I'll come back and take the position of the sect master." Ping Yonka said helplessly, "But you're the sect master of Zhongzhou now." The conversation was truly bizarre. The young woman's words were incomprehensible, and Ping Yonka's response was a mess. Yet, there was a hint of affection toward the younger generation in the conversation. The crowd was so shocked that they didn't know what to say. As for those brave and impetuous young disciples of Aoyama, they had been dragged to the back of the crowd and taught a lesson by their masters. The young woman in red said with raised eyebrows, "Since Aoyama doesn't have a sect master yet, why can't I take on the responsibility?" What she said was even more absurd. No matter how much Ping Yonka liked her, he couldn't let her continue talking. "Stop it," he said hastily. "I'll choose a good sect master for Aoyama. There's no hurry." The young woman in red wanted to say something more, but the white-haired elder Xiang Wanshu coughed twice and transmitted the message through the spiritual awareness, "Forget about the sect master. Otherwise, what if they want to take on the responsibility of our sect master? Though they like you, your father and them are not on good terms for so many years." She snorted twice and didn't say anything else. Ping Yonka felt relieved. He stepped into the air and left the area of the black jade plate, leaving behind a sword will. The sword will was so faint that the regular cultivation practitioners couldn't sense it, but it was like a flame igniting the whole patch of prairie. The liquid gold in the grooves started burning, emitting a golden flame that wasn't real, and started flowing forward slowly. The great formation of heavenly arrival was activated. Yamatsui was responsible for the second turn of this great formation. Dozens of scholars stood around the black jade plate, gazing at the flowing golden liquid nervously. As the liquid gold moved forward slowly, more and more grooves were filled up, as if many amulet characters were being written out one by one. A profound sword will was hidden in the deep end of the amulet formation. The liquid gold gradually occupied 1/3 of the area of the black jade plate. The sword wills appeared wherever the liquid gold passed, and the magic treasures that came from various places started emitting a glow. Hundreds of the magic treasures lit up one after another, exuding an unimaginable pressure. This spectacular scene attracted everybody's attention, and the exclamations and praises could be heard from all over the peaks. However, as time elapsed, the glow and sword wills didn't occupy the entire black jade plate, because there was a shadow in the deep end of the great formation of heavenly arrival. The shadow was a black mountain. It wasn't until now that the people remembered in astonishment that the master dead dog, the principal guard of Aoyama, was still in the great formation of heavenly arrival. This was not a ridiculous mistake. It was a surprise that the master dead dog was still in the great formation of heavenly arrival after the formation had been activated for a long time. Countless gazes passed through the glow and the intermittent sword wills and fell on the master dead dog. The girl in red yelled anxiously, "Master dead dog! Wake up!" The master dead dog opened his eyes slowly. It was unclear if he had heard what the young sect master said or sensed the gazes with different emotions. It was as if two dandelions had appeared in the dark wilderness. The whole world was well aware of his prowess and profoundness, and thought that his gaze should be cold and indifferent, but his eyes were so warm at the moment. There was even curiosity in his warm eyes. They were lovable when they were together. The master dead dog was like a seeing-eye dog that had worked for a great many years and could finally run freely on the grassland outside his home, looking forward to the world outside his home. Many people felt bewildered and didn't know what to say. Yuan Chu understood what the master dead dog meant, and the shocked expression on his face turned into relief and a sincere smile. Some elders of Aoyama, like Guananshan, even shed tears while smiling. "Yes, I'd like to go out and have a look." The voice of the master dead dog echoed among the peaks of Aoyama. It was filled with curiosity and expectation, and a bit of embarrassment. Chapter 973. Many years ago, the dead dog was the most powerful of the 4 principal guards of Aoyama. As time went by, he had become one of the most powerful fighters in Chaotian. Nobody knew how high his cultivation state was. The higher his cultivation state was, the more formidable the heavenly punishment he would encounter when he left Chaotian. Similar to the Snow Girl, it was many times more difficult for him to ascend than other human cultivation practitioners. Even though he didn't need the passage for the fairy ladies, it was still extremely difficult. In comparison, it was much easier for Ada to ascend. He was carried away by Zhao Lei. If the dead dog intended to leave Chaotian, this great formation of heavenly arrival was the best opportunity. That was why he had been sitting in it the entire time and had no intention of leaving. "I want to go out and have a look." This was the first time that all the cultivation practitioners, including the disciples of Aoyama, heard the dead dog speak, and it was the first time he said this. Over the years, he had never left the place except when the sect was on the brink of destruction. He had stayed in the Dark Sword Jail before, and then on this black jade plate. Though the black jade plate looked beautiful and magnificent, it was in fact the ruins of Shangda Peak. He of course wanted to ascend and go to the fairy world to have a look, but the Aoyama sect needed him, so he had stayed here. Why was he the principal guard of Aoyama? That was the reason. It wasn't until the Aoyama sect had unified the world that he had finally requested to leave, but he still felt a bit embarrassed and shy. Having said that, the dead dog looked at the peaks of Aoyama, hoping to get permission out of habit. Then he remembered that the two surviving sect masters, Jingjiu and Zhuoruzhui, were not here. His line of sight moved from Ping Yongka and Yuan Chu to Nan Wang in the end, saying, "I'd like to go and have a look on behalf of that bird." Those cultivation practitioners who were of high status and had lived long enough knew what he meant, but it was something that had happened more than 1,000 years ago. Taiping Zhenren, Immortal Jingyang, Lu Ci, and Yuan Qijing ate hot pot at the Shangda Peak and then went to Maching Peak with their swords. The dead dog and the devil rooster, the two guardians of the Shangda Peak, played an important role in the civil strife of Aoyama and the Shangda Peak. Taiping Zhenren had promised them that when a man attained the Tao, even his chickens and dogs would ascend to heaven. Nan Wang hadn't entered the inner circle back then, but he had heard this story many times from his two big brothers. He let out a faint smile as the dead dog reminded him of this story. "Everything is gone." She tossed the fairy book over and said, "Take care." The dead dog leapt up in the air while holding the glittering golden fairy book between his teeth. For countless years, it had been at the Shangda Peak. Even when Shanghai Peak was crushed into a pancake by the war, it did not leave. It had finally left today. It had suddenly surpassed the height of Tianguang Peak and left the range of the great formation of Aoyama, arriving at a very high altitude in the empty realm. Looking at the seemingly endless sky, its gloomy and cold eyes reflected a faint blue light. In the next moment, it bit the fairy book to pieces without hesitation, and the patch of blue sky in its eyes was broken as well. Boom! A huge light beam of 10 square miles shot out from the peaks of Aoyama and shot into the broken sky. Peng Lang flew into the light beam with his hands behind his back. Su Zai followed closely behind. Cain Yang leapt up in the air by stepping on a mirror. Yuan Chu was the last to set off while holding Yushan's hand. Just as the huge beam of light shot into the sky, there was an extremely intense reaction in the sky. In the distant empty realm, the flashes of lightning appeared incessantly, extending to tens of thousands of miles. Countless flashes of lightning converged at the same time, forming a formidable electric net. The electric net didn't fall down directly, but converged abruptly, forming a violent whirlpool together with an unknown fog-like object, in which a gloomy blue light and a ferocious white light could be seen. Those violent whirlpools of thunder and lightning converged at an unimaginable speed, turning into a huge whirlpool from the south to the north and from the east to the west, covering the whole sky. Seeing the whirlpool of thunder and lightning covering the whole sky and sensing the chilly energy, the cultivation practitioners in the peaks of Aoyama were too nervous to say anything. The expression on Ping Yongka's face grew grave, as he was certain that he had never seen such a formidable heavenly punishment, which was similar to the scene when his master left. Su Zai and the others couldn't withstand the heavenly punishment of such a level because of the dead dog and Peng Lang. Fortunately, they were inside the great formation of heavenly arrival, so they didn't have to face it directly. Boom! The huge whirlpool of thunder and lightning struck down countless bolts of lightning, illuminating the whole heaven and earth. The violent energy struck the surface of the light beam of the great formation of heavenly arrival along with tens of thousands of bolts of lightning, but they couldn't penetrate it. The huge light beam above the black jade plate grew a bit dimmer, with a great deal of violent energy flowing on its surface, and the squeaking sound of the compressed space could be vaguely heard. The scholar Yamatsai and the swordsmen of various sects on the ground employed their most powerful magic methods to stimulate the power of those magic treasures. Hundreds of light beams of the magic treasures grew brighter, and they managed to withstand the light beam. Looking at the mountain-like black figure in the sky, Peng Lang grasped the sword by his waist with his right hand, wondering if the dead dog could withstand the pressure in the sky. Don't do anything for the time being, Kanyang yelled down below. Her pretty face looked a bit pale under the illumination of the bolts of lightning outside the light beam. The heavenly punishment was still going on. The whirlpool of thunder and lightning struck down more and thicker bolts of lightning. The huge light beam shot out from the black jade plate trembled slightly, and it was unclear how long it could withstand the heavenly punishment. If the energy of heaven and earth in those magic treasures and crystals was exhausted, the heavenly punishment wouldn't be over, and the great formation of heavenly arrival would collapse. Judging from the current situation, the great formation of heavenly arrival wouldn't be able to withstand the heavenly punishment until then. Did Kanyang's calculation and the deduction of various sects make a mistake? There was a more formidable problem. Would the space wall between heaven and earth become thinner, or even disappear, after all the energy of heaven and earth was absorbed by the great formation of heavenly arrival? The black battleship hovered in the universe in silence, as if it had become one with the darkness around it. It was only from this angle that the void could be seen clearly. It was because the rays of the distant permanent stars would be refracted when they passed through the void. The robot, which looked like a piece of scrap metal, sat by the side of the light beam. A great deal of information was traveling back and forth in the invisible world as the blue lights flickered. After hearing another story from the movie told by Shin Yunmai, Tong Yen became indifferent and said with a faint smile, "You disciples of Aoyama are all talkative." Shin Yunmai said, "I'm really curious about that female disciple of yours. She looks very young. Aren't you afraid that the unicorn will rebel against you?" The computer system on the battleship was running at the highest speed. The energy supply provided by the crystal engine was obviously hot, which even disturbed the life support system. Tong Yen untied the buckle around her neck. After a moment of silence, she said, "Her name is Zhuo Juexiao. She was still in closed-door cultivation when I left. I don't know how she became the sect master." Shin Yunmai was very smart, so he immediately found the key point in her word. "Zhuoruzhui's Zhua?" he asked. Tong Yen said, "Juexiao is that guy's illegitimate daughter. I don't know how she ended up among the common people. Later, she was found by Nan Wang, who took her to the Tianguang Peak and scolded her for 3 days and 3 nights. Zhuoruzhui had no choice but to hide in the manor cave and do closed-door cultivation. I don't know if she has come out or not, so I didn't ask her just now." Hearing the beginning of the story, Shin Yunmai felt bored. "What happened later?" he asked. Tong Yen said, "Later, Nan Wang took her to Qingrong Peak to raise her. Since it was close to the Shinma Peak, she often went there. Zhao Leo liked her very much. In short, everyone loved her as much as they hated Zhuoruzhui. One year, my young sister went back to Chaotian for some reason and went to Green Mountain to chat with Zhao Leo. She suddenly fell in love with this little kid and liked her so much that she brought her to Penglai. It wasn't until 10 years ago that she was brought back to Cloud Dream and formally became my personal disciple." Shin Yunmai was extremely narcissistic and arrogant, but he was still a little shocked when he heard these names. He thought that the girl's background was as pitiful as his, so he sighed with emotion and remarked, "Your world is really chaotic." Shin Yunmai was a narcissistic and arrogant man, but he was still a little shocked when he heard the names of these people. "It's because Zhuoruzhui is chaotic," Tong Yen said. Shin Yunmai said, "You're right, and it's not as chaotic as Gu Qing." No sooner had he said this than the computer system of the robot gave off a faint ding sound. In the next moment, countless streaks of light fell from the top of the column to the ground. It meant that the calculation had been completed. Tong Yen displayed a rarely seen uneasiness. "Are you sure that the calculation is correct?" she asked while looking at the empty space. Shin Yunmai was not as confident as he usually was. He kept on checking the calculation. After a moment of silence, he said, "The boundary and the range of energy intensity should be correct, but you know it's a range. A range meant that it would sway, and the sway would be unstable. There were many uncertainties in the universe, but they didn't dare to do it if they weren't sure. Otherwise, what if the boundary between the main universe and Chaotian suddenly disappeared? No matter whether it was the prison in the space left by the civilization of a higher state, the shell picked up by that god in the ocean of the universe, the black hole or the dark realm with a different speed of light, nobody could tell the structure of the world in which Chaotian was located and what basic rules it abided by. Though it was unlikely, what if the matter and the antimatter were annihilated when they met? The energy erupting at that moment would be 100 million times more powerful than the plan to ignite the star. The humans wouldn't have to worry about the invasion of the sea of dark matter, and they would be annihilated along with the billions of stars in this galaxy. The quietness in the black battleship didn't last long. Looking at the empty space, Shen Yunmai and Tong Yen suddenly said in unison, "We might have thought too much about it." They might have thought too much about it. The world in which Chaotian was located had existed for a great many years. None of the rays of the universe, the meteorites, the bitter cold, or the dark energy that could penetrate anywhere could break through the boundary. Why did the humans think that they could do it? Perhaps the boundary was the domain of God. All they needed to do was infuse enough fairy energy into the boundary to maintain the amount of spiritual energy in Chaotian and help the Great Formation at the same time. But where would the fairy energy come from? The permanent star was too far away. Even though they were the ferrymen, they couldn't move it to the place. Otherwise, it would be a legend. The crystal engine of the battleship let out a faint buzzing sound. The robot that looked like a piece of scrap metal let out a similar sound. He stood up slowly and walked toward the outside of the cabin. "Are you sure you're coming?" asked Tong Yen. "Though I've learned the inherited Heaven Sword formation pretty well, I have to admit that it's more suitable for destruction. The formations of your Zhongzhou school are more suitable for mastering." The robot walked to the cabin door and picked up a device of the latest model. He suddenly turned around slowly and said to Tong Yen, "Look, no matter where I am, even if I'm in this exiled black coffin, they won't forget to leave a device by my side." Tong Yen stood up and looked at him, saying nothing. Shen Yunmai's voice came out from the robot. "It's because I was the best at doing this in the whole universe before Jingju appeared. In other words, the old man in my family created me to do this." His voice was not as casual and arrogant as usual. Sometimes it sounded evil, with a hint of sadness in its nonchalance. After a moment of silence, Tong Yen said, "You weren't created. You were born by your mother." The robot fell silent for a while. Then it burst out with Shen Yunmai's wild laughter. "Are you King comforting me?" The shabby robot left the black battleship along with the laughter, drifting toward that patch of nothingness. Tong Yen also came to the cold space. He sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes. He made a gesture with his hands in front of him and started to employ a Taoist magic method. A strand of steady and faintly discernible mysterious intent spread out from his fingers and slowly followed the robot. The robot came to the edge of the patch of nothingness and sat down at a predetermined position. In the control room, the head of the robot looked a bit pale as it was illuminated by the refracted light of the fixed star in the distance. The ear studs flickered slightly, and a luggage bag appeared in the robot's hand. The bag was opened, revealing a ball-shaped object. It was the stomach of the old dragon, which contained an unknown number of multi-phase nuclear bombs. Shen Yunmai's face was devoid of any expression. He lifted the melting device with another mechanical arm, tore off the nuclear power furnace behind the device roughly, and tossed it behind him. Even the latest superparticulate nuclear power furnace didn't have enough power. It could melt a small section of the space crack, but it couldn't cross the boundary. When the nuclear power furnace flew to the front of Tong Yen, the formation intent fell on the robot. Countless extremely tiny, subtle, and incomparably high-level array patterns instantly covered every part of the robot. Shen Yunmai didn't pay attention to these changes. He stared at the patch of nothingness attentively while manipulating the two thick mechanical arms to hold the melting device tightly. It was unknown when the stomach of the old dragon, filled with multi-phase nuclear bombs, had been connected to the melting device. The formation patterns were suddenly illuminated by the light of the fixed star in the distance. The robot, which looked like a piece of scrap metal, suddenly became sacred. The fingers of the mechanical arm activated the melting device, as if it were a gun being fired. At the same time, the Cloud Dream formation ignited the nuclear bombs in the old dragon's stomach. There was no sound, but there seemed to be a tremendous and terrifying boom. Even the space there seemed to be a slight distortion. Those multi-phase nuclear bombs, which were powerful enough to destroy a planet, were now sealed in such a small space by the old dragon's stomach and the formation. How powerful would they be once they were ejected? An unimaginably magnificent torrent of light and heat gushed out from the front end of the melting device. The robot trembled violently, but its mechanical arms remained terrifyingly stable under the control of Shin Yunmai's powerful divine sense. If it were a battleship, it would have been flying around in such a terrifying energy storm and might even disintegrate. I should develop a special base platform. The superparticulate transformation of the gravitational field generator is the best way to solve these problems and avoid risk. F*ck, am I really crazy? These thoughts flashed across Shin Yunmai's mind. The surfaces of the two mechanical arms had begun to melt, and the metal liquid formed small balls were floating in the air. Countless sword lights lit up in the depths of Shin Yunmai's eyes. The metal liquid balls suddenly turned into countless small flying swords, forming another sword formation in the Cloud Dream formation deployed by Tong Yen. It was the Aoyama sword formation. The violent torrent of light and heat fell into the void and then returned to silence. Nothing happened. The mechanical arms were melting more and more violently, and even the front end of the melting device was showing signs of disintegration. However, it was restrained by the two formations. The unimaginably high temperature passed through the protective armor of the robot and into the control room. Shin Yunmai's face grew redder, and the expression in his eyes grew crazier. Tong Yan's voice rang out in the control room of the robot, with a hint of admiration and ridicule in his voice. Whether it was admiration or teasing, it was a rare thing for him to do. You seem to be a welder. Jing Jiu had said something similar in front of the space crack on the Huangyu 2 planet. Shin Yunmai cursed in a hoarse voice. Are you country bumpkins all idiots? Tong Yen said, I mean you are very handsome. Shin Yunmai snapped, you know nothing. The movies I watched in the old mansion often had similar scenes. Many old cars are still parked in the city on the main planet. Yes, what I'm trying to say is that this is not F*king welding, it's fueling. The hundreds of magic treasures on the black jade plate were emitting a faint glow. The surface of the huge light beam was full of whirlpools formed by energy storms. The scene was extremely horrifying and disturbing. The cultivation practitioners among the peaks could sense it clearly. The spiritual energy in heaven and earth was decreasing rapidly, and the great heavenly formation was on the verge of collapsing. Su Zai couldn't help but turn his head to take a look at Cain Yang from the top of the huge light beam. He found that her face was pale, but the expression in her eyes was very calm. At the critical moment when those magical treasures were about to become useless and the golden patterns on the black jade plate were about to fade away, along with countless exclamations from the peaks, an extremely bright torrent of light and heat suddenly fell from the highest point in the sky. The thunderstorm whirlpools of the heavenly tribulation and the projection of the sun in the distant sky were all eclipsed at this moment. Was the torrent going to open up a path to heaven? If the two worlds were connected, what kind of terrible consequences would occur? No, the torrent was merely a pure energy. Though it looked violent, it was actually very precise. After it landed on that spot in the sky, it didn't deviate from its original position. The torrent was like polishing a mirror or carving a piece of jade. It was slowly and meticulously thinning out that spot in the sky, both hard and soft. Looking at that spot, Peng Lang knew that the torrent came from beyond the sky. He tapped the hilt of his sword slightly with his fingers, thinking how he could help the other party, and also help himself and his group. The great heavenly formation was on the verge of collapsing. If it were to collapse in the next moment, something bad would happen even if the torrent was only a small part of it. Jing Jiu and the dead dog could leave easily, but Su Zai and Cain Yang would have a hard time. As for Yuan Chu and Yushan, at this critical moment, the people on the peaks of Aoyama and all over Chaotian were looking up at the sky, paying no attention to anything else. For instance, the fish in the pond were scared to death, the animals on the prairie fell to the ground with stiff bodies, and the clams in the deep water of the West Ocean suddenly opened their shells and spat out the precious ocean pearls. It wouldn't take long before the bottom of the ocean became a bright world. Another example was the stone turtle on the top of Tianguang Peak, which had no stone tablet but was still lying there in front of the broken hut, had opened its eyes, looking at the huge light beam shooting into the sky and the black figure who was resisting the heavenly punishment, a mocking expression showing in its aged eyes. "I'm the oldest principal guard in Aoyama, and I've been lying here for a much longer time than you. But I'm not worried. Why are you worried?" Like that bird, it perished because it couldn't figure it out. At most, it would be like a cat, shamelessly asking people to carry it out, but it would be slain in the end. Thinking of all this, it opened its mouth slowly and yawned. Countless bolts of lightning struck down on the top of Tianguang Peak. An unimaginably violent energy struck down at the same time. Then, it vanished without a trace. It closed its mouth slowly and burped, and then closed its eyes again, turning into a stone. Many people noticed that the heavenly punishment had struck down on Tianguang Peak. They looked up in surprise, but they didn't find anything. It seemed that the heavenly punishment was not real. In the next moment, they remembered those people in the great heavenly formation, but all they could see was a patch of blue sky when they looked up. The huge whirlpool of thunder and lightning had vanished. The heavenly punishment was over. Those people had also disappeared. The space wall between Chaotian and the outside world was still there. A large amount of spiritual energy was slowly returning to heaven and earth. It came from the breathing of the stone turtle. Chapter 974. After the dead dog, Peng Lang and the others had ascended, Gu Qing didn't leave again. It was unclear whether it was because he missed his hometown after such a long time, or for other reasons, that he stayed on the Shenma Peak. 3 years later, Jing Jiu took his 2 wives to travel around Chaotian in the horse-drawn carriage of the Gu clan, similar to the way Jing Jiu traveled with Zhao Liu and Guodong. In the 4th year, they went to the Guoqing temple. The previous emperor Jing Yao, who lived in seclusion here, finally met them, and they went back to Zhaoga City together. On the 2nd night after she returned to Zhaoga City, Empress who passed away with her eyes closed. When she died, she did not die in her former bedroom, but in the side hall next to the main hall. Even her bed was still the same bed. Jing Yao's father left on that bed. Looking at the woman sleeping on the couch, Jing Yao's face was pale and his monk robes fluttered in the wind. He was silent for an entire night. Until now, he still couldn't figure out who his mother loved. Those were not important anymore. There were still many things to be arranged, such as opening the mausoleum, reuniting the tomb, observing filial piety, and missing. Gu Qing and Jing Tao stood on the stone steps in front of the hall, looking at the morning light shining through the newly built Xingyang Gate 500 years ago. Jing Tao's eyes were red and swollen like real peaches because she had cried too much. Gu Qing's face, however, did not show the slightest hint of worry. He was even more taciturn than usual. "Let's go." He left the palace with Zhen Tao and went to the Jing family's old residence. After Brotherly, the members of the Jing family were all ordinary people. It had been passed down for several generations, so they didn't have much memory of what happened more than 500 years ago. However, they still kept the study room and cleaned it carefully every day, not daring to touch it. But a few decades ago, someone felt that the land outside the window of the study was empty and planted a crabapple tree. That begonia was personally cut down by Marshal Ant. Who would have thought that she would grow it back a few hundred years later? Gu Qing stood in front of the window and looked at the begonia tree that was currently snowing. He said, "You see, going around in circles is actually going around in circles." After a moment of silence, Zhen Tao said, "I didn't expect you to send her back in the end." Gu Qing said, "She has always had a good relationship with His Majesty." Jing Tao couldn't help but ask, "What about you and her?" Gu Qing looked at the slowly falling crabapple blossoms and said slowly, "You've watched it for hundreds of years, you should know that it's very good." "I don't think I understand it. Don't tell me that she and I both like you. You know that I don't like you." After a moment of silence, Zhen Tao said, "I just hate you and her. That's why I'm following you. I'm going to make it so that you won't be able to enjoy yourself for hundreds of years." Gu Qing said nothing. Looking at his white sideburns, Zhen Tao suddenly felt sorry for him. She said in a trembling voice, "Go ahead and ascend." Gu Qing reached out to touch her head and said, "I'm already old. Why do you insist?" Jing Tao couldn't help but cry again. If heaven has feelings, heaven will grow old. Fortunately, this wouldn't happen. Time was still flowing slowly, and the sky in Chaotian was still blue and tranquil. A few more years had passed, and no more news came from the upper world. As a result, many speculations arose, and some signs of instability appeared. Somewhere in the distant land of West Wind, someone had finally come out and tried to restore the order of the world. The godly ship of Penglai Island that had returned from the alien land brought back the news. Ping Yongjia opened his eyes on the Sword Peak. He ran to Cloudy Town and ate hot pot. Then he ran to Nanhezu, Shao Mountain, Machio, past the Heavenly Well, went up to the East Ocean, past the huge whirlpool, and kept running until he passed the outer island where the giants resided and ran into the West Wind. It took him half a day to finish the journey, and he even stopped by the edge of the island to talk to the giant for a while. After arriving in the land of West Wind, he went to the holy capital where the church was located and revealed himself. He talked to the crowd and killed the courageous pope, and then returned to the Sword Peak to sleep. A few days later, the young sect master of Zhongzhou School came to visit. Zhuo Juexiao flew straight into the clouds on his sword and landed in front of the cliff cave. He waved his hand to disperse the dust, and stared at Ping Yongka's face and said seriously, "Don't you find it annoying to be the sect master?" Ping Yongka opened his eyes and sighed helplessly. In the beginning, everyone was lazier than the other, and later on, everyone ran faster than the other. "What can I do?" Zhuo Juexiao rubbed his hands and said, "Uncle Ping, I'm not lazy, I'm still young, and I don't plan to run away in the short term. Why don't you let me shoulder the responsibility of the sect master of Aoyama?" Ping Yongka felt even more helpless and said, "I shouldn't have let Bai Zhao take you to the sea in the first place." Zhuo Juexiao knew that he still couldn't convince him this time, so he said the real message he wanted to convey: "They're all gone." Ping Yongka said, "That's good. You should also concentrate on your cultivation and strive to ascend as soon as possible." Zhuo Juexiao sneered, "Why do I feel like you're wishing me an early death?" Ping Yongka was choked by her words and said, "Don't talk so much, you sound like your father." The black battleship was moving forward slowly in the dark space. A huge black dog was crouching on the deck of the battleship quietly. Its black hair was fluttering in the windless space, looking like black water plants, absorbing the light rays of the distant white permanent star. This battleship was not very large, only about 3,000 meters long. All the windows were blocked by the grayish-black composite material plates, which looked like armor plates or decorative patterns. If anyone saw this scene, they would be shocked speechless. The people on the battleship were staring at each other speechlessly. Kane Yang and Yuan Chu and his wife had not come back to their senses yet, thinking that this was what ascension was all about. It didn't seem to be that interesting. How could this world be so dark, cold, and desolate? It was much more boring than the world Zhuo Juexiao had mentioned, not to mention the legendary fairy realm. Peng Lang stood at the front of the command cabin, looking at the internal structure of the battleship displayed on the light screen. Curiosity was written all over his ordinary face. Along with the clear sounds of friction between the parts, the door of the medical cabin was opened and a huge robot walked out. Shen Yunmai's voice came out from the robot. "Let me introduce myself. I'm Shen Yunmai, the general commander of this operation." Tong Yen was asking Su Zai about Hejan's situation. Hearing this, she couldn't help but raise her head to shoot him a glance. Shen Yunmai was extremely shameless, especially after being soaked in the medicinal liquid for so many days. "My father is Shun Aoyama," he said calmly. Kane Yang, Yuan Chu and the others had thought this metal puppet was quite odd, because it dared to compete with Tong Yen for the command. Hearing this, the expression on their faces changed abruptly. Shun Aoyama was the name of the great grandmaster of Aoyama. If the spiritual soul in the puppet was the son of the great grandmaster of Aoyama, he must be an extraordinary person. Yuan Chu and young sister Yushan bowed to him respectfully, saying, "Greetings, senior master." Kane Yang and Su Zai bowed to him earnestly, and so did Peng Lang. If the battleship weren't shielded, the dead dog would lower his head when he heard this self-introduction. "Don't listen to him," Tong Yen said expressionlessly. "Jingju won't call him senior master, and he and the great grandmaster of Aoyama have already turned against each other." Hearing this, the new ascendants on the battleship changed their expressions again, wondering if this person was an enemy. Sensing the change of atmosphere on the battleship, especially when he saw Peng Lang's hand on the hilt of his sword, Shen Yunmai didn't dare make any more jokes. "Don't get me wrong," he said hastily. "I'm Jingzhou's best friend in this world, and it's because of him that I broke up with my old man." Peng Lang realized that this was the reason, and his right hand left the hilt of his sword. Yuan Chu and Kane Yang eyed each other, thinking that this was more like it. Shen Yunmai didn't expect such a calm reaction. "Don't you feel surprised?" he asked confusedly. Su Zai said in a mocking tone, "It's normal for the Aoyama sect to deceive the master and kill the great grandmaster. Besides, the immortal Jingyang has such a bad temper. How can nothing happen to him?" Shen Yunmai maneuvered the robot to point at the top of the battleship, indicating that it was the principal guard. "Which side will it take? That's the biggest problem." Yuan Chu said righteously, "The Master Knight Howler won't meddle in the internal strife of the Aoyama sect." Shen Yunmai sneered. "Who would believe that? Who was the one who broke the sword formation on Mo Qingfeng back then?" Yuan Chu was speechless, wondering how Shen Yunmai knew all these things. Tong Yen couldn't stand it anymore. He walked to the middle of the two groups and said while looking at these ascendants of the new generation, "We should give you enough time to learn the general rules of this world, but we don't have enough time. So we'll use a simpler method to get a general idea." Having said that, she put on the brain-computer intercommunication system that had been prepared beforehand and asked Yuan Chu and the others to put it on. Then she started to inject the information into the system. The huge robot leaned against the wall of the battleship and looked at the new ascendants who were learning with their eyes closed. "Who do you think is the fastest?" he asked suddenly. "I don't know," replied Tong Yen. As expected, Peng Lang was the first to open his eyes. He took off the system and said after a moment of silence, "It's very interesting." "Is it more interesting than your world?" asked Shen Yunmai. Peng Lang didn't heed him and said to Tong Yen, "It should be a bit deeper." "We don't have much time," explained Tong Yen. "You can read it by yourself on the way." Soon after, Su Zai and the others opened their eyes one after another, in the same order as their cultivation states. When they first opened their eyes, their expressions were a bit bewildered, but they soon calmed down, looking thoughtful. It seemed that they were still pondering over the content of the information. If this is a light battleship and this is a robot, then what about you? Are you a program inside? Asked Yuan Chu while looking at the robot. Shin Yunmai was a bit annoyed. He opened the door of the control room and said, "I'm a living person." Yuan Chu and Yushan were startled by the head, exclaiming, "Is this a ghost?" Yet, Su Zai's countenance remained unchanged, as he said, "It's nothing more than a ghost cultivation method." Tong Yen shook her head and brought the conversation back to normal. She said while pointing to the star chart on the light screen, "The sun of Chaotian is in front of the battleship. We'll pass by it. The battleship will be activated in about 10 minutes. Don't miss the window." Yuan Chu asked confusedly, "In the universe, the rule of navigation is to stay away from the massive celestial bodies, like neutron stars, white dwarfs and black holes. Though it's merely a regular fixed star, it's still dangerous. Why do we need to get close to it?" Shin Yunmai said, "The more dangerous a place is, the more beneficial it is. According to the data collected by Jingzhou himself, the fairy energy can be collected the fastest in a region near the fixed star's orbit. You have just ascended, so you need to improve your cultivation state and strength as soon as possible, so you have to go there to temper the fairy energy." Yuan Chu felt speechless, thinking that he had finally ascended successfully. Though he didn't feel like he had become a fairy man after coming to this dark world, it was nevertheless an important leap in the path toward heaven. He needed to meditate for a while, even if he couldn't hold a banquet to celebrate it. Why was he so busy? In the next moment, he thought of what Tong Yen said about the lack of time and what Shin Yunmai had said earlier about him falling out with the Grandmaster of Oyama because of Jingzhou. He started to feel nervous and worried reflexively. Looking at the expressions on their faces, Shin Yunmai said with a sneer, "I've taken such a great risk to get you out here because I want you to do something for me." They were all smart people, and like Yuan Chu, they had all guessed what they were going to do. Cain Yang behaved like a general on the chessboard. "Just tell me what you want to do," she said. Tong Yen told them briefly about the current situation. She told them that Jingzhou had been missing for many days, and that he had decided to launch a surprise attack on the Grandmaster of Aoyama. "We couldn't beat them in a fight, so we had no choice but to come back and find some helpers," Su Zai said. Yuan Chu said without hesitation, "Our cultivation state is not high enough. We can ascend thanks to the great formation of heavenly arrival. We'll cheer for you when the time comes." Su Zai continued, "This is an internal issue of your Aoyama sect. I'm just an unorthodox cultivator, so it's not convenient for me to meddle in it." After some thought, Cain Yang said, "I have to find my master first. What if you deceive us?" Shin Yunmai said innocently, "Even if you don't trust me, don't you trust Tong Yen?" Cain Yang shot a glance at Tong Yen and smiled embarrassedly. It was well known that Tong Yen was one of her teachers on the chess playing. It was also because of this that Cain Yang knew better than anyone else how dirty his heart was. Shin Yunmai exclaimed angrily, "That's too much. I risked my life to get you out of here, but you don't want to fight any of us? You have to pay for the tickets first." Peng Lang felt embarrassed as well. He said to Tong Yen, "I have to see the immortal first. If he wants me to fight, I'll do it." "Are you the rumored Peng Lang?" Jingzhou said that your talent is not inferior to mine. How come you don't understand the situation at all? Shin Yunmai said exasperatedly. "He didn't dare to meet anyone because of my old man. That's why we have to fight the old man and rescue him. But you have to find him before you are willing to help us fight the old man. Don't you think it's a triple tribulation? How can you solve it? What's wrong with your intelligence?" It was then that Tong Yen, who had been silent, said, "The time window is up. I'll open the number 3 gate on the right in front of us. Get ready." Along with his voice, a piece of the grayish-black plate covering the surface of the battleship tilted up slowly, and the bright light of the outside world could be vaguely seen. Along with the light of the permanent star, the omnipresent signal waves entered the battleship. As long as it could be seen, it would be seen. For example, the overused you and the abyss, he and Aoyama, and so on. Shin Yunmai would never make such a mistake. He activated the device that generated the gravitational field immediately. The black battleship was close to the permanent star at the moment, so most of the directions were blocked. Coupled with the gravitational field, they didn't have to worry about being discovered. As a result, they couldn't see what was happening on the full moon planet. I suddenly felt like chatting, so I wrote a few sentences. But I found that I was even more talkative than Shin Yunmai and exceeded the number of words. You guys should spend more time. The general meaning is that I drove around the south of the Yangtze River yesterday and felt good. I like Ichang very much, but I also miss Daqing. I like to write. You see, I'll keep writing even if I don't write a long story. Thank you. I'll send you a WeChat message. Also, the second movie that Shin Yunmai mentioned yesterday is Sunshine. I recommend it to you. End of this chapter. Chapter 975. Countless light screens in countless places in the universe showed the vast snowy land of planet Moongazer. The battleships that were rushing to planet Moongazer were divided into several batches. Some slowed down and revealed their figures in the dark space of deep space, then changed their course and headed to an unknown destination. Some continued to head to planet Moongazer. The space passage from planet Moongazer to the Scorpion Tail Nebula had been sealed. A net consisting of tens of thousands of battleships and more than 20 ascenders had been spread out in this universe, trying to catch Jing Jiao and Xue Jie. Even if Xue Jie was at her peak, facing the concentrated attack of the entire human civilization, there was a high probability that she would choose to hide, not to mention that she had killed 9 virgins and should be in a state of extreme exhaustion and weakness. However, no one could be sure that they would be able to find her and Jingjiu. After all, they had lived in an ordinary residential building on that planet for more than a year without being discovered. Hundreds of transport spaceships and more than a dozen light battleships landed on the surface of planet Moongazer one after another, stirring up countless snowy winds. The battleship that was destroyed by the Happy Monk had fallen in the mountains north of Smog City. The burning wreckage had now turned into charred rock. The middle-aged researcher in the gray checkered shirt walked out of the residential building 720 and looked at the satellite outside the atmosphere. The corners of his lips curled up slightly, revealing a smile. Looking at the image on the huge light screen on the sea and looking at Lu Shirsui's smile, Zhuoruzhui's expression became extremely ugly. What does that smile mean? Is it mockery? Showing off? Establishing prestige? Is it learning from Xue Jie? Is it for me to see? After saying this, he threw the coconut shell in his hand onto the beach in the distance. The monkeys ran away, completely untroubled. He suppressed the shock and annoyance in his heart and maintained a half-kneeling posture. He turned to the patriarch beside him and said, "I really don't know when he came." The patriarch of Aoyama said expressionlessly, "It's obvious that they don't trust you." Zhuoruzhui said helplessly, "I didn't expect an honest boy like Lu Shirsui could hide so much. He must have been led astray by Tong Yen. This disciple is not bad. He has beaten the great compassion monk to the point that he is crawling on the ground. His strength is beyond my expectation," said the Grandmaster of Aoyama after shooting him a glance. "Are all the juniors in Chaotian so formidable?" Hearing this, Zhuoruzhui was intrigued, asking, "Do you know much about the current Chaotian?" The Patriarch of Aoyama said, "I've read the book he wrote." Zhuoruzhui's eyes lit up and he said, "Words are always inaccurate and not direct enough. You haven't been back for many years. Do you want to get a gaming cabin and go have a look?" The founding ancestor of Aoyama looked at him in silence and said, Since you agree with my methods and are willing to become my successor, don't think about contacting them all the time." After a moment of silence, Zhuoruzhui nodded and did not say anything else. The monkeys were playing games with coconut shells on the beach in the distance. The sea water was rising and falling, ravaging the beach. The fish in the pond were swimming in the water and chasing each other in front of the bamboo poles. The bamboo poles were inserted in the hot sand. It was probably because his knees were burned by the sand that Zhuoruzhui felt restless. He couldn't keep silent for a long time, asking curiously in a low voice, "Aren't you going?" "Where to?" asked the Grandmaster of Aoyama as he put down a book of poems in his hand. Pointing to the map of the galaxy on the light screen, Zhuoruzhui asked confusedly, "The Snow Girl and Jingjiu have appeared. Aren't you going to catch them?" The Grandmaster of Aoyama said, "I have a cold leg, so it's hard for me to move around. I don't think I can defeat the Queen in the outside world. Since they have chosen to show up in the universe, they will be found, and they won't be able to leave this place." Zhuoruzhui understood what he meant. After a moment of silence, he scooped up some seawater from the pond in front of him and poured it on the sand, starting to rub it unconsciously. The Snow Girl had appeared. The young woman in the bathrobe by the hot spring would find her and control her. Jingjiu couldn't wake up, he was merely a sword. As far as the Grandmaster of Aoyama was concerned, the sword was not a threat. It should be the case. As he was thinking of all this, he didn't notice that the sand wetted by the seawater had gradually turned into a tower in his hand. The space crack in the ruins of the factory on the Moonview planet had been melted by Tsingju successfully. The space crack in the Heavenly Fire industrial base was much larger, and without the help of the Snow Girl, the melting process was much slower. It was like the wrinkles on the corners of a girl's lips when she curled them up. It wasn't until today that the melting process had been smoothed out. Seeing the band of green smoke in the deep part of the planet, the officers and soldiers on more than 100 battleships cheered. Chao Yuan returned to his own battleship. Looking at the scenes and the information on the light screen, his tired body grew heavier. This battleship was indeed his. To put it more precisely, it belonged to the planet of the Buddhaland. The joyous monk had decided to go to the Sea of Dark Matter and left all his inheritance to Chao Yuan, including that planet. Chao Yuan placed the heavy iron broadsword on the ground gently and watched the video again. The glass windows of the City Hall of Fogshan City were all broken, flying in all directions like the raindrop. The joyous monk and Lu Shisui had a fierce battle, and the joyous monk fled in defeat, tearing a battleship apart. Tsingju told all the ascendants that the joyous monk had gone mad. How else could he explain it other than being mad? He seemed to have seen a scene. The thin and feeble joyous monk sat paralyzed in the grand nirvana, flying aimlessly in the dark and empty space. It was the same as what he had done in the Sea of Dark Matter. Was he truly mad? As the founder of the Zen sects and the founder of the Guoqing Temple, he was a true Buddha. How could a Buddha go mad? It was not madness, it was merely the manifestation of a crazy idea. The idea of destroying the bodies of the humans and letting them exist in the grand nirvana in the form of their souls, even the remnant souls, had been the joyous monk's idea all along. The so-called craziness was because he had chosen this absurd path when no other path could be taken. Chao Yuan walked to a room in the deep end of the battleship. It was a large room with a transparent glass coffin in it. The fairy skeleton of General Li was lying in the coffin in silence, his eyes closed, surrounded by the fairy cranes and the propitious clouds. Standing outside the huge transparent coffin, Chao Yuan remained reticent. The most outstanding human minds had either gone mad or died because they couldn't find a way out. How could the threat of the Sea of Dark Matter be resolved? Both General Li and the joyous monk had been pondering this question for a long time after their ascension, but they hadn't found the answer yet. Chao Yuan felt a bit sad. All of a sudden, he didn't want to pay any attention to what was going on here. The Emperor and the immortal Jingyang could find a way out for themselves. Chao Yuan thought that he, as a junior, should find a way out for the joyous monk. He left the battleship with the iron broadsword on his back, heading toward the deep end of the space. He intended to send the joyous monk off, to send him the true peace. A huge battleship approached the heavenly street slowly. The heavenly street was the largest space transfer port in the Scorpion Tail Nebula. It was located among the exits of a dozen space passageways, so its location was very good. The huge battleship was extremely large, with a length of more than 30 miles. It was a special transport facility rarely used by the military of the Federation of the Milky Way. In comparison, the Heavenly Street transport port looked small, like a toy for children. The transportation port on the Heavenly Street had been prepared for the transportation of all kinds of materials. Countless mechanical arms reached into the space, sending all kinds of materials to the huge battleship in a steady stream. It was a magnificent scene. There were tens of thousands of civilians on the battleship, and they had no idea what those mechanical arms were doing. Most of them were standing by the windows and pointing at the various shops and buildings in the transfer station, discussing with curious and excited expressions on their faces. These civilians came from a planet in the early stages of development in the Scorpion Tail Nebula and were on their way to evacuate. Many monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter had come out from the crack in the space of the Heavenly Fire industrial base. Most of them had been wiped out by the fairy swordsman En Xing and the battleships that arrived later, but some of them had drifted to the deep end of the space. According to the calculation of the central computer, the monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter would probably pass by the planet that was in the early stages of development 3 years later. As such, the inhabitants of the planet had to be evacuated in advance so that they could be wiped out later. Of course, the most important thing was to prevent the second infection. In ancient times, this was the same as fortifying the walls and clearing the fields. The evacuation of tens of thousands of people was much easier than the initial plan of evacuating 700 million people. The military had only dispatched one of the largest transport battleships to accomplish the task. The civilians who were evacuated were not dissatisfied with the decision. After all, this was the first lesson they had received in the civic education since they were young. Moreover, the facilities on the battleship were very good, even more comfortable than the residential areas on the surface of the planet. More importantly, the government promised to send them to the colonized planets with better conditions on the main planet region. During the journey from the early stages of development to the Heavenly Street transfer port, they could see nothing but the dark space and the seemingly unchanging stars outside the windows most of the time. It was rare to see a transfer port, so the residents who didn't have many opportunities to travel in space to begin with were very interested in it. It was then that a ray of light suddenly appeared in the deep space of the transfer port, and they could vaguely see a disc-shaped object. Some of the people standing by the window had extremely good eyesight, and they even saw a paralyzed human on the plate. As soon as the exclamations sounded, they were drowned out by an even louder wave of exclamations and discussions. "What is that? Is that the Buddha in the game? Is that made of gold? It's so bright, and that knife is so big." The people by the windows were shocked as they watched the golden Buddha chase the person on the plate into the depths of the universe and quickly disappear. A moment later, a bright light suddenly exploded in the distant universe, and a sharp alarm sounded in the transfer port and the battleship. The people followed the instructions in the alarm and reluctantly left the windows, dispersing in all directions according to the route map that popped up on their wristbands. The facilities on the giant battleship were very complete. Even if there were tens of thousands of people living in it, there would not be any problems. According to the family, everyone had their own room. A little girl carried a plate of food and looked at the route map that popped up on her wristband. She moved forward seriously, even somewhat mechanically, and then climbed up a circular staircase. As she walked, Her neatly cut black hair swayed rhythmically in front of her forehead, looking like a watermelon skin. Ding! The door of the room opened smoothly. Hua Shi walked into the room and put the plate of food on the table. She tore open the outer membrane and said, "It's time for dinner." Having said that, she took a look at the outside of the window, and found that there was no sun or changing sunlight outside, only the dark universe. "Is this dinner or breakfast?" she asked anxiously. In the next moment she realized that nobody ate with her, be it for dinner or breakfast. There were 2 beds in the room. Jingjiu was lying on the bed by the window, sleeping soundly with his eyes closed. He furrowed his eyebrows tightly. It was unclear if he had seen something in his dream, but the green rope on his wrist was much thicker than when he was on the full moon planet, or in other words, it was much more tangible. "Big brother." Hua Shi sat by the bed and woke him up gently. "If you still don't feel like eating, I'll go get some medicine for you to take, okay?" she said in a soft voice. Jingjiu opened his eyes and woke up. He didn't feel any pain in his head, but he couldn't help but furrow his eyebrows even tighter, almost pushing Cold Cicada out of the room. Since he left the full moon planet, he had been having headaches a lot, and the spot between his eyebrows was swollen and stuffy. He didn't know why. He looked up some medical knowledge on the internet and thought it might be because of sinusitis. The problem was that those who had gone through the primary gene modification wouldn't get diseases like sinusitis and tonsillitis. Was it because his family was so poor that they couldn't even afford the primary gene modification? He hadn't woken up yet. He was still that isolated and lonely youngster. His IQ was fine, but his way of thinking was like that of a little kid. He couldn't remember anything, and he didn't know what was going on. All he knew was that he should hold the snow girl in his arms when he had a headache. Hua Shi asked him if he needed to take some medicine, but his disease couldn't be cured by any medicine. Only the snow girl could control it temporarily. The snow girl didn't have the energy to pay attention to him at the moment, so Cold Cicada had to pretend to be an ice bag to take her place. Wrapped in the quilt, the snow girl stood on Jingjiu's bed and looked at the dark space outside the window, saying nothing. Besides indifference, her black eyes showed a hint of tiredness and contemplation. She had looked at this patch of the universe for a long time and had figured out some things. The space fisher appeared on the planet Plenilune because she had seen the joyful monk in the Sea of Dark Matter, and then she was seen by the Sea of Dark Matter. As a result, the Sea of Dark Matter rushed toward that planet and generated 9 black suns, in an attempt to find and destroy her. It was because she had the possibility to destroy that world, or at least those monsters. She had seen that monk once in the snowland many years ago. It turned out that the cause and effect had started a long time ago. "You eat it yourself. I don't have an appetite," Jingjiu said to Hua Shi, and then said to the snow girl, "You look very tired. Should we find a place to rest?" Looking at the dark space outside the window, the snow girl suddenly had countless fine lines flashing in her black eyes. Those lines seemed to be alive, like the thread-like life forms under the electron microscope. Yet, if one looked at the deeper part, he or she would find that those lines were actually the light, the sword light. Countless fine swords formed a sword formation, which began to change. Then, it grew and multiplied ceaselessly. In the end, the sword lights vanished without a trace. She saw a space passage in the distant space, and she even saw a planet in another galaxy in the void. The planet looked like a hollowed ivory ball, layered on top of each other. It was beautiful and extremely complicated. After she had accomplished the important task in the space passage, she went to that planet to take a rest, and then went to the ancestral planet to kill Shin Aoyama. "Ing!" She uttered a sound triumphantly. Jingjiu was bewildered, wondering why Ing was so simple today, unlike the usual Ing, which was usually a lot of work, but she only uttered one word: perfect. The apex. Chapter 976. Hua Shi wondered what they were chatting about. She didn't think too much about it. She sat by the table and started eating. She scraped the plate with a small plastic spoon, drawing many lines on the half-frozen food. It was unclear whether it was because the food tasted good that day or for some other reason, but she was in a good mood. She hummed a song while eating. Cold cicada flew up from between Jingju's eyebrows and flew around the small room, leading the mosquitoes to make a pleasant melody, as if they were playing music and dancing for her. Having finished eating, Hua Shi was about to go out with the food plate in her hand. Jingju didn't quite understand what she meant. "There are robots," he said slowly. In fact, there were robots or automatic devices on the battleship to take care of the food and return the food plate. There was no need for him to do it himself. It was well known that the space inside the battleship was very large, and it was difficult for them to go back and forth from the living area number 4 where they were. "I'll go and watch a cartoon on the way," said Hua Shi. Jingju said while pointing to the light screen on the wall, "There's one here too." Hua Shi pouted and said, "It's boring to watch it alone." Jingju didn't think too much about it, but he thought it was unsafe to let his younger sister go out alone. "I'll go with you," he said. Hua Shi said, "You don't even know the difference between a space knight and a man in the armor." The reason adults didn't want to play with the children was because they thought the games played by the children were boring. The reason children didn't want to play with the adults was because they thought the adults were boring. Hua Shi preferred watching the cartoon with the other children, because they could argue and sympathize with each other. It was much more lively. As such, she declined the invitation extended by Jingju even though she was suffering from her illness. She left the room and went to the children's entertainment area with the best location and the best lighting in the living area. She started watching the latest episode of the cartoon with the children she was familiar with. After a long while, a child suddenly screamed while covering his mouth adorably while looking at the outside of the transparent wall. Hua Shi and the other children were startled. They turned around to look at the outside of the wall and saw a battleship traveling in the living area. It was of course not a real battleship, but a three-dimensional image. In the next moment, many monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter crawled out from the corners of the wall, causing countless screams in the living area. More battleships descended from the sky and fired at the monsters. Laser cannons and nuclear bombs exploded, forming fireballs that flashed from time to time. The living area was filled with cries of surprise. Many adults were like the children, leaning on the transparent wall and watching the virtual battle outside. They were extremely excited. It was similar to the scene when they were looking at the Tianjia transport port, the plate and the golden Buddha chasing after the plate. It was only then that many people realized that the scene they had just seen might have been fake. It was a trick that the government had put up because they were worried that the evacuating people would be bored. As expected, the official of the battleship announced in the system broadcast that the simulated scenes of these battleships pursuing the monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter were the latest game to be released by the White Company, and what they had seen at the transportation port on the Heavenly Street was the advertisement for the large-scale interactive game, The Path Toward Heaven, by the Twirling Rain Company. Laughter rang out in the living area. The middle-aged men who thought they had seen through everything smiled appropriately and began to explain to their wives and children when and why they had seen through it. The government of the Federation of the Milky Way seemed to care a great deal about the mental health of the evacuating people. They were worried that they would be bored, so they announced many measures. In addition to the usual operations like the gaming compartment and the stereoscopic theater, the battleship had also set up many interest classes, which were explained by the officers and soldiers on the battleship. The qualified members of the evacuating populace were also invited to participate in the activities. In the end, the battleship introduced many contests, and indicated that the winners would receive generous prizes. Hearing this, Hua Shi's eyes beamed. She lowered her head and started reading the words on the bracelet. Her eyes grew brighter and brighter. In the end, she gave up watching the cartoon and ran back to her room. She pushed open the door forcefully and yelled, Big brother, are you going to participate in the interest classes?" Jingjio sat on the bed by the window, holding the snow girl in his bosom. The snow girl's small round hand was pressed against the center of his brows. It seemed that she was treating a patient. Hearing Hua Xi's voice, Jingju opened his eyes and shook his head to indicate that it was not necessary. He had taken various interest classes in the administrative center of Foggy City for a year. After he won the prize, he had lost interest in them. Hua Xi asked while tilting her head, "What about the contests? There are a lot of prizes." With the help of the snow girl, Jingju felt a bit better, but he was still a bit sleepy and not interested in them. Hua Xi ran to the front of the bed and said earnestly while looking into his eyes, "There are many kinds of contests, including your favorite game, Space Army Chess." Jingju thought about it carefully and was sure that his favorite game should be Gamoku in a row. As for Space Army Chess, it was more like the most painful memory. It was then that the broadcasting system in the room suddenly made a sound, asking all the populace to pay attention. Look, it's going to be announced," Hua Xi said happily. What came out of the system had nothing to do with the interest classes or the contest. The standard time is 11:00 tomorrow. Our battleship will enter the Jialei Passage. Everybody, please get ready to watch the scenery and get ready to pass through. The Jialei Passage was a famous space passage in the Federation of the Milky Way. It was impossible to observe in the warped hole, and the spacecrafts were not sure of their displacement, so they had no concept of speed. As such, it was impossible to determine the length of the passage. According to the scientists, the twisted space passage had no length in the first place. The standard to distinguish the space passages was the length of the passage. The Jialei Passage was the passage from the Scorpion Tail Nebula to the main nebula, and it was the passage that took the longest time to get through. That was why the battleship informed the evacuating populace not to forget to watch the scenery and take pictures the next day. As for the preparation for passing through the passage, it was to remind the populace that there was no network in the space passage, so they had no way to contact the outside world. As such, they should quit the game in advance or download the 3D movie. As far as Jingjiu and the Snow Girl were concerned, this passage was meaningless, at least not until tomorrow. Tomorrow would come soon. For some reason, the Snow Girl jumped into Hua Xi's bosom, and cold cicada landed on her head. This meant that Jingjiu would participate in the contest. Jingjiu had a bad memory, but he still recalled the bad memory of being pounded on his chest by the Snow Girl with her small fists after he lost to the little fatty in the contest. Guided by the lights of the battleship, the tens of thousands of evacuating populace managed to maintain their biological clock. It was 7:00 in the morning, the standard time of the Federation. Soft and low-pitched music was playing in the living quarters, and steam was coming out from the rear ports of the self-heating beverage machines. The cleaning robots had just finished their last task and retreated to the passage under the cabinet. The floor was as smooth and clean as a mirror. A few drunk people were lying in a corner in the distance. They must have been out for a whole night. The battleship would provide everyone with a limited amount of hard liquor according to the number of their bracelets, but it was not a problem for these drunkards. After all, it was not difficult to borrow someone's bracelet and ask for a cup of liquor. Hua Xi held the Snow Girl in her arms and held Jingjiu's hand. They came to the second row of the dining area and found her favorite food. Then, she took him to pour 2 cups of protein drinks and started eating with relish at the table. Perhaps it was because she didn't have to cook for herself. The little girl was very enthusiastic about eating. As they were eating, some populace who had gotten up early came to the dining area. Some of them greeted them in a friendly manner, asking them which district they were from and why they hadn't seen them on the planet before. It was well known that there were only tens of thousands of inhabitants on the planet that had just been developed, and the interpersonal relationships there were much closer than in other places. Jingju didn't explain it to them, and Hua Shi didn't explain it either. As such, the conversation couldn't continue. In fact, this was the first time the two of them had appeared in front of the people and the surveillance equipment. A pair of brother and sister holding a snow-white doll was a conspicuous combination, especially after the invasion of the Sea of Dark Matter on the full moon planet. Yet, they couldn't be seen on the surveillance equipment, as if they had vanished into thin air. It was quite amazing. And if they wanted to, nobody could even see them. After killing the 9 Dark Ones and getting in touch with the Dark Region, the Snow Girl seemed to have absorbed some new rules and comprehended some new magic. Yet, why did she choose to come out and take a walk today when she hid in the underground sewer and didn't want to be discovered by the central computer? One had to know that this was a risk. After breakfast, they didn't go back to their room. There were many more populace like them. It was because they had to enter the Grey Passage at 11 o'clock, and there was not much time in between, so it was unnecessary for them to go back and forth. It was probably for this reason that the activities began at 9 o'clock in advance. The sound of music could be vaguely heard in the distance, and the sound of the skateboards rubbing against the high-strength glass could be heard in a transparent isolation room high above. The cheerful atmosphere in the living area grew stronger. Jingjiu and Hua Shi carried the Snow Girl to the concert hall at an angle of 170 degrees and listened to the musical for a while. Then, they followed the crowd to the public stage on the 7th floor. Standing on the periphery of the crowd, they watched the populace and the soldiers performing various kinds of performances. Some were performing acrobatics, some were singing, some were playing musical instruments, and there was even a civilian who insisted on sparring with the warship's officers in terms of martial arts cultivation. However, he was hit in the nose the moment they met and was carried to the infirmary. Hua Shi asked Jingjiu if he wanted to play the piano, but he shook his head. Suddenly, there was a hubbub from somewhere. It turned out to be a puzzle game on the card table. After half an hour of intense competition, the winner had finally been decided. Hua Shi was even more interested. She pulled the corner of Jingjiu's clothes and squeezed to the side, looking around curiously. Suddenly, she saw something and said with bright eyes, "Brother, it's your favorite game, Space Army Chess." There were 3 chairs on the platform near the French window. Hundreds of 3-dimensional light-carved chess pieces were suspended in the air on the platform in silence. A middle-aged man with no hair sat in the chair in silence. From the discussions of the people, the brother and sister knew that this bald man was the chief engineer of the preliminary planet development. It was said that he was a top student from planet Tianpu's Northwest University, China. He had just won 5 contestants in a row, and he actually felt lonely as a master. It was just a game to kill time, so there was no need to worry about how many credits he would lose. Moreover, humans always had a high opinion of their own intelligence, so the master engineer did not feel lonely for too long. Soon, the next opponent came. Then, without any accident, the man was defeated in a very short time. "It seems that he is very formidable," Jingjiu exclaimed while recalling the playing style of the master engineer earnestly. Though he said so, he had no intention of going up to the platform, because he didn't want to be lectured by the Snow Girl if he lost. It was then that Hua Shi suddenly uttered, "Ouch," and said while covering her neck with her hands, "It seems that I was bitten by a mosquito." The level of science and technology in the Federation of the Milky Way was quite high, so was the biology. Many planets hadn't completely eradicated the cockroaches, but the mosquitoes had already been eradicated. She grew up in a well-known family on the Stargate base, so she had no idea what mosquitoes were. She had only been bitten twice since she arrived on the full moon planet. The Snow Girl lifted her head to take a look at her, and then pulled back her line of sight. She continued to look at the dark universe over her shoulder. Jingjiu suddenly walked up to the platform and sat in front of the engineer. He picked up an engineering mecha and moved one step. Along with his movement, the huge chess pieces formed by the light rays in the sky also moved one step, attracting the attention of many people and causing a lot of discussions. "Hua!" she exclaimed in surprise and squeezed to the front of the crowd while holding the snow girl in her arms. Looking at Jingjiu with a nonchalant expression on his face, her bright eyes full of pride. As the chess game progressed, the people grew more and more surprised. It was because Jingjiu didn't seem to be in a disadvantageous position in front of the engineer. The discussions in the field had gradually died down. It was then that the broadcast in the battleship rang out again, reminding the populace that the passage of Grey Ray was just ahead and that they would enter it in 10 minutes. The information passages on the battleship were closed one by one. The grayish-black planks fell off like scales, blocking the windows in a little while. The people were in no mood to watch the game or the concert. They came to the windows in tandem, looking at the universe ahead. The passage of Grey Ray was already vaguely visible, looking like a patch of faint nebula, but it was much closer. There was a dark and gloomy speck in the patch of light and fog. This was why the scientists in the Federation of the Milky Way had guessed that the so-called warped hole was a special black hole. As the warped hole was observed and utilized, this conjecture was no longer possible. Over the years, the scientific circle suspected that the warped hole was the sea of dark matter leaning against the windows. The populace looked at the scene in the distance. Many complicated emotions welled up in their hearts, and they couldn't stop exclaiming softly. If Jingjiu could see the entrance to the passage of Grey Ray, he would recall the scene when he looked at the abyss through the glass in the deepest part of the fiend prison many years ago. Yet, he was staring at the go-board at the moment. The engineer had left for the moment and went to the window, but Jingjiu was still pondering while staring at the go-board. The situation on his go-board was not so good. In other words, it was the most difficult and dangerous moment. As a result, the engineer could leave so easily, but if he made a slight mistake in his next move, he would lose the entire game. The passage of Grey Ray was like a hole leading to the abyss. On the other side of the hole was the boundless dark universe like the abyss. More than 200 battleships were parked in the universe in silence. The main laser cannons, the electromagnetic ring cannons, and the powerful plasma firing platforms had all reached out from the battleships and aimed at the exit of the passage. In the command battleship in the front, Chunye stood by the window expressionlessly, and the two devil fairies in black stood behind him in silence. In other parts of the universe, more battleships and more immortals were on their way here. The top. Chapter 977. The hot mist rising from the surface of the hot spring was disturbed by the wind, forming areas. Some areas had thinner mist, while others had thicker mist. It looked like a nebula. Among them, there was a nebula-shaped fog with a strange shape. It was extremely thin in the middle, and one could faintly see the black stone on the other side. It looked like the entrance to a spatial passage. The girl in the bathrobe sat beside the hot spring, her jade-like legs gently moving in the hot water. She stared at the mist and had been quiet for a long time. Countless images and green streams of data flashed before her eyes, and then fell down like a waterfall. Like everyone else, she didn't see the last scene of the battle on planet Full Moon. She could only analyze the data afterward. The data included the circles of light formed after the death of the 9 virgins, the flow of particles drifting towards the star, and the crystal-like sweat beads on the field. According to the results of the analysis, she was sure that the Snow Girl was not in a good state at the moment, as well as the possible escape routes. Using all the computing power of the central computer of the Federation of the Milky Way, she calculated that the opponent would probably escape through the Jialei passage. Even though there was only a 4% chance, she still asked Chunye to rush over with the battleship. She did not expect to actually see the snow charmer. Just as breakfast was about to begin, she saw those figures walking out of the living area. Yes, the surveillance equipment could not capture the light emitted by the Snow Girl, but there were always other ways to confirm her existence. To exist was to exist, and to not exist was to not exist. No matter how powerful the Snow Girl was, in the end, she still had to obey this nonsense. The young girl thought that killing the 9 virgins had made Shui Jie a little tired, so she let down her guard. If the cunning human, Jingjiu, were still alive, he would definitely not make such a mistake. Ignore him and don't wake him up. Just let him continue to be an idiot. The girl gave her order to the battleship in the distance, then looked down at her bosom. There was nothing in her arms. The wooden tray floated above the hot spring, and the wine in the porcelain cup had already spilled out. She didn't even look at it. She didn't want to care about anything else today, except catching the Snow Girl. Also, this game of space army chess was so simple. Was Jing Jiu going to lose? I'm really curious. You've never lost on the chessboard. What kind of move will you make? But time seemed to be running out. The battleship was about to enter the Grey Passage, and it would not be seen. What a pity. Chen Yi stared at the exit of the tunnel and suddenly said something strange. The exit is also the entrance. That was a load of crap. The so-called nonsense was meaningless repetition, but humans were always willing to do such things, such as today. The 2 demon immortals in black did not have any reaction. They knew that this sentence did not have any profound philosophical meaning. It was just an unconscious murmur in his nervous state. Chen Yi was now the commander-in-chief of the military. His willpower was as strong as his body, especially after General Li's death. However, he still felt nervous. The next moment, he received an order from the distant main planet, and the lines on his face softened a little. It was not that the shadow had disappeared, but that he had really seen the shadow. The Snow Girl and Jingjiu are indeed on that battleship, he said. Because of these words, the surroundings instantly became unusually quiet. The edge of the passageway outside the battleship's window shone with a faint light, making it look even more demonic. A black-robed demonic immortal suddenly said, "If I'm still alive after this, I'll go to planet Tianpu to study." The other black-robed demonic immortal said, "If I'm still alive after this, I'll find a vacation planet and get drunk for 3 years." In games and literary works, this was called raising a flag, which was rather inauspicious. But they didn't seem to care about it. Chen Yi didn't say anything, not even joking. It was because this was not raising a flag, but making a wish. If what Chen Yi said was right, and the Snow Girl and Jingjiu were indeed on that battleship, they would meet in a few hours. Even if the god of the distant ancient civilization had left a way to control the Snow Girl, they still believed that they would die with her. It was the Snow Girl. It was as simple as that. The battleship system suddenly issued a warning tone, reminding them that the Scorching Sun battleship had passed through another passage and arrived in the same universe as theirs. Thinking of the scene where the middle-aged man in the gray checkered shirt crippled the merry monk, Chen Yi said after a moment of silence, "Don't fight him alone." The 2 black-robed demonic immortals revealed a self-mocking smile and said, "It's still nonsense." 10 days ago, the Scorching Sun battleship left the Heavenly Fire industrial base at the highest speed, heading for the rescue of the Full Moon planet. Now, it had left the Full Moon planet at the highest speed and arrived at the main planet area through another space passage. However, no matter how fast it traveled, it couldn't reach the entrance of the Grey Passage. The universe was too vast. The speed of light was too slow. Even if you get there, what are you going to do? Xingju asked while looking at the back of Lu Shisui. Looking at the light rays outside the window, which had become weird because of the relative speed, Lu Shisui asked earnestly, "What about you? Which side are you going to take?" Xingju said after a moment of silence, "I haven't decided yet." According to Yamatsai's ideology, he was willing to sacrifice everything for mankind, but it didn't mean that he agreed to sacrifice the lives of innocent people for the sake of mankind as a whole. The question now was whether Jingjiu was innocent or not, and whether he should take the responsibility. Lu Shui hadn't thought about this issue, saying, "It's not good to think too much. It's easy to become the Zhongzhou school of the past." The Aoyama sect had always thought that the Zhongzhou school was too clumsy in handling matters. Xingju sighed and said, "Even if you get there, what can you do? The history of Chaotian is recorded in those battleships on their way there. The Snow Girl is no match for them even if she is in her heyday, not to mention that she must be extremely tired or even weak at the moment." Lu Shui fell silent. If the queen couldn't even break through this siege, what could he do no matter how powerful he was? He suddenly sat down on the ground and took out the magic treasures like the 10,000 soul banner, the first child sword and the city guard pen, and began to check and nourish them. "What are you going to do?" Xingju asked. Lu Shui said with his head lowered, "The seniors are indeed very powerful. I need to think about it." Xingju knew that the seniors he referred to were the ascendants of the previous generations like himself. "What are you thinking about?" he asked confusedly. "I've thought it through." Lu Shui lifted his head and said, "I can kill 3 people like Chunya. If I'm lucky, I can kill one more." The battleships scattered in various parts of the universe suddenly headed in one direction, which was quite eye-catching. Even if they didn't have the right of access to the central computer, they would know that something significant would happen on the other side of the Jialei passage simply by looking at the changes of the light spots on the star map. Ran Handong sent the data she had found to Zhao Lei. Looking at the huge battleship approaching the entrance of the Jialei passage, Zhao Lei said, "Jingjiu is on it." Ran Handong felt worried. "Shall we strike?" she asked while looking at the grassland in the north of the main planet. Zhao Lei uttered softly. Ran Handong asked nervously, "How can we get there?" The gravitational field in the deep part of the grassland had been activated. Countless snowflakes were flowing down, forming a huge snowball that covered the mountains and the hot spring in the mountains. It was a difficult task to kill the young woman in the bathrobe by the hot spring, not to mention that her opponent had prepared in advance. Zhao Lei said, "I'm not the one who did it." The entrance of the Jialei passage was getting closer and closer. The black spot had gradually turned into a black sun, which was even darker than the background color of the universe. Unfortunately, the evacuees on the battleship didn't see the scene. The composite board outside the window of the battleship had been lowered, blocking all the starlight. Most of the passageways on the battleship had been shut down, except for the control system of the crystal engine. The populace went back to the living quarters to listen to the concert and watch the game. The engineer and those who were interested in the Space Army chess had returned to their original spot. Many people were still discussing the scene they had witnessed and what would happen next. As the members of the exploration team of the planet, it was the first time for many of the populace to travel such a long distance in space, and it was also the first time for them to pass through the rumored warped black hole. As such, they were very excited. Some of them didn't care so much about it. They waved their hands to signal for Jingjiu to play chess. It was evident that Jingjiu was in a terrible situation. He would lose if he made one more move. The populace realized that they had been watching the scenery for more than 10 minutes, but he still hadn't admitted defeat or made a move. They couldn't help but feel anxious. The engineer was also a little surprised. "Do you want to leave?" Hua Shi was also thinking about the same question. Should she leave? The countdown to enter the Jialei passage had started. A number was displayed on a green screen, and it kept getting smaller. At the same time, some mechanical and electronic sound was heard. 17, 16. When the countdown reached 10 seconds, the battleship would reach the tidal zone of the warped black hole. Before that, it would enter a state of complete isolation. For safety's sake, it was better to leave first. As for the historical moment of Jingjiu losing, they could just watch the video later. Hua Shi pouted. 13, 12, she blinked and was about to leave. 11, 10, 9, she blinked and realized that she couldn't leave. She was still standing at her original spot. The populace was looking at her with a strange look. No, they were looking behind her. It was unclear when Jingzhou had left the platform and stood behind her. He raised his right hand and used his long fingers to press against the back of her neck. His neatly trimmed nails had become the sharpest and thinnest metal wire in the universe. They pierced through her skin and entered the broken chip. After watching for so long, it's the most crucial moment now. It'd be a pity to leave, Jingzhou said. 3, 2, 1. At this time, the countdown was over. The battleship entered the Jialei Passage and cut off all contact with the outside world. Hua Shi was expressionless. She looked at the doll in her arms. Shuijiai smiled. The two ends of the red line curled up. Extremely terrifying. Extremely proud. End of this volume, Apex. Chapter 978. Look, the bright green days are rushing to the poor hometown. Rushing to the collapsed old house, the absent childhood? A deserted garden sings in the depths of the soul. A deserted garden sums up the good times. I wake up on a black leather book. I open my eyes on the ancestral planet, like a confused rooster crowing twice, shaking off the feathers of dreams and fragments of language. I wake up at the edge of the world, wandering, holding a dim determination. From zero to zero, from trauma to trauma. From the source to the source, from silence to silence. The little trembling life, the last watchman of the earth. The day dives down on a large scale. I think of my kind lying on the ground. They are blessed. They reject the world so decisively. Striding into the depths of silence before me. Jingzhou stood behind Hua Shi. His fingers were pressed against her neck like a gun. Hua Shi looked down at the snow girl in her arms. Her face was expressionless. The snow girl grinned. All the sounds seemed to be fading away, whether it was the music from the concert or the discussions of the crowd. The next moment, all the sounds appeared again and spread rapidly in all directions. Monster! Mother! Ah! At the beginning, the snow girl kept her face buried in Hua Shi's arms. Only her eyes were exposed. To anyone, she looked like an ordinary doll. At this time, people suddenly saw the blood lines on her face and the strange smile. They thought that some monster had come to life and screamed in fear. More and more people noticed the strange situation here. Even those who did not see it were frightened by the people running around and screaming. The children were crying, the adults were screaming. The engineer turned pale and ran very fast. The soldiers on the warship who maintained order and the martial arts cultivators who were good at fighting among the people ran against the direction of the crowd, trying to control the situation. Snap! A light sound was heard. The snow girl stretched out her round little hand and snapped her fingers. This light sound spread in all directions at an even faster speed. It brought countless gusts of cold wind and suppressed the collective screams of the people. It echoed in the spacious and huge body of the warship. Gradually, the screams disappeared. People's footsteps also slowed down. Whether it was the officers in the command room or the people who rushed over bravely, they all stopped where they were. Their eyes gradually became blank. Then they slowly closed their eyes, as if everyone had entered hibernation at the same time. Countless sounds were produced. Then they went far away. Then they came back. And then they disappeared again, just like thunder carried by the wind. Hua Shi did not turn around. She looked at the people who were falling down and asked, "You're awake?" The green rope of light on Jingzhou's wrist grew darker, as if it existed in reality, indicating that he had woken up. When we were in the sewer, I asked His Majesty to set the time of waking up. When we were in the sewer, I had His Majesty set the time of waking up. I don't really understand what you mean. Hua Shi's eyes were not as innocent as usual. They were very cold. Jingzhou said, "You are not Hua Shi now, but that computer." Hua, I said. "And said of Hua of Emperor," he said. He Hua. Jingzhou said, The name is merely a code name. Emperor, he said of King Jingjiu. Jingjiu said, I know you like to bring your awareness to a close place to observe. Maybe it's more like a real scene, making you feel that you are a real person. How did you know I'm here? Asked Hua Shi. Jingjiu said, when you're here, you like to curl your lips and hum more often. But it's different. He had been observing her from the main planet to the 857 base, and then to the holiday planet, and he had noticed many details. He even suspected that she was already in this little girl's body during the selection of the priestess of the Stargate. Hua Shi curled her lips and said, it's just a habit. It was a habit to curl her lips, hum her lips, or to Hua Shi to watch the things she was interested in. As soon as she said that, a soft crack came from the back of her neck, as if something had broken. It was a very advanced chip that had been destroyed by a powerful information flow in the galaxy beyond the mist, and it had automatically repaired itself at some point in time. It used to be a habit of human beings. Even if you found out that the chip had been repaired, how could you be sure that I would arrive? Hua Shi turned around and looked up at him. Jingjiu said, His Majesty and I had discussed it. We would create the scene you wanted to see, but we would cut off any possibility of you seeing it through the network or the radiance of the charter. In this way, you might arrive in this body out of curiosity. Hua Shi opened her eyes wide and asked curiously, why couldn't I arrive in other monitoring devices? Because you wanted to be a human, replied Jingjiu. The automatic report of the computer in the system of the battleship indicated that they had entered the Gray Passage. Now, this battleship and the people on it were isolated from the outside world, and they would be unable to contact the outside world for a long time. Hua Shi sighed and said, You guys are really accurate. Jingjiu said, I hadn't woken up yet at that time. It was His Majesty who calculated it. Hua Shi curled her lips again and put the Snow Girl on a table beside her. The Snow Girl waved her hand to sweep away the cups on the table and squatted down. The orange juice was spilled on a certain sleeping citizen. It looked a little indecent. What I wanted to do was very simple. I left the last move before entering the space passage. Jingjiu continued, If you had been willing to continue watching, I might not have needed to wake up. Hua Shi snorted and said, I've been to the warped hole before. That was because you were curious. When you discovered this problem, you never came back because you couldn't connect to the network here. Jingjiu looked into her eyes and said, Then you wouldn't be able to control the central computer and then control human civilization. Hua Shi was silent for a while and said, This is a good game. Yes, this was a game that Jingjiu and the Snow Girl had prepared for the girl. When they landed on the full moon planet and found the Snow Girl in the underground sewer, the two of them had a short spiritual communication. During that spiritual communication, they had made all the preparations, and then Jingjiu fell into a deep sleep until he woke up today. Otherwise, Jingjiu wouldn't have taken the risk to leave with Hua Shi at the end of the battle in the galaxy beyond the fog. The body of this little girl was a container that contained the soul of the girl in the bathrobe, or rather, the consciousness of the computer. All in all, this was the body that she was most used to and liked. She could observe Jingjiu and the Snow Girl at a close distance, and she could leave as long as she had the chip and the network. It was absolutely safe, so this body was her first choice. However, the chip on the back of her neck was destroyed, and the battleship was in the isolated warped hole, so she couldn't leave. As a result, she became a being that could be touched, sensed, and killed. Jingjiu said, I woke up for a brief moment on the basketball court to see if you were there. At the time, he and the Snow Girl were slaughtering the monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter on the surface of the planet and the 9 dark ones in the sky. Both Jingjiu and the Snow Girl had glanced at Hua Shi a few times during the intense battle, in order to confirm this fact. The Snow Girl intentionally left a few milliseconds before she destroyed the satellites, the chip, and the entire charter network. She intended to use this magnificent battle to attract her to come here. To their surprise, Hua Shi was still Hua Shi, and that person didn't come. As such, Jingzhou had no choice but to sleep again. Jingzhou said, "I didn't expect you to come to the battle that day, but this clumsy Go game attracted you instead." Hua Shi curled her lips and said, "Maybe it's because I predicted that you would win that battle, and I wanted to see you lose." She continued expressionlessly, "In fact, I just predicted that there would be danger on the other side, and I didn't want to make the planet look too ugly. But this is merely a regular Go game. It's not a big deal for me to come and have a look. Do you think you can guess it?" Jingzhou said, "This is an interesting idea." The corners of Hua Shi's mouth curled up even more as she said, "I don't understand one thing. Even if I showed up at that time, there was no space passage on the Moongazer Serpent. What were you going to do then? Kill me directly? Or like now?" Jingzhou said, "If you went to the other side, all the networks would be frozen and destroyed in the next moment, and you would be trapped in this body as well." Hua Shi said, "It's different. There are many networks in the underground of that planet, and those 9 million people have bracelets on their hands." The Snow Girl suddenly uttered a gurgling sound. Jingzhou listened attentively and translated to Hua Shi, "If that were the case, she would throw you into the sea of dark matter." Hua Shi was taken aback. After a while, she sighed. "She is indeed a ruthless and unfeeling prison master. She is truly unfeeling." Noticing the term, prison master, Jingzhou arched his eyebrows slightly. Hua Shi said to the Snow Girl, "Don't be naughty anymore. You have an agreement with God back then. God has prepared so many methods to wipe out the sea of dark matter. He is one of them, and so are you. Do you want to betray him?" This was not unexpected. The joyous monk believed that the Snow Girl was the only hope to wipe out the sea of dark matter. The Snow Girl didn't respond, and neither did Jingzhou. This was expected. It was none of Jingzhou's business. Jingzhou said, "Nobody can order us around." Hua Shi said in a mocking tone, "Why did you hide from me for more than a year?" "It's not necessary now," said Jingzhou. Regardless of what method God had prepared for her, she couldn't control the Snow Girl anymore. It was because he could kill her at any time. As he said this, Cold Cicada flew up from the top of the Snow Girl's head and landed precisely on the back of Hua Shi's neck. Hua Shi sensed a slight pain, knowing that she had indeed been bitten by a mosquito this time. "You're so annoying," she snorted. Jingzhou uttered suspiciously, not sure if she was truly expressing her emotions or acting like a little girl. Hua Shi said with a faint smile, "Well, I admit that I've been caught by you people. At least it's this me. But, so what? Do you really think you can kill me? As long as there are chips and electric waves, I'll be there. If you kill this me, there will be countless of me." She would be there wherever the radiance of the charter was. She was everywhere and would never die. This sounded like a problem, but it was not a problem for Jingzhou. Jingzhou said, "I asked Nan Chu the same question back in the ruined temple in Chaotian. His answer was that this him was dead, and that him was him. Are you willing to sacrifice this you to create another you?" The smile on Hua Shi's face faded away gradually. I was the cognition of self. It was the continuous existence of the thought. It was the projection of the cognition of the world on one's own body. Since they realized the existence of I, countless philosophers and people who were willing to think had been thinking about what I was, and they had given countless definitions. Regardless of how they defined it, the thinker would have a simple and clear answer in the end. I is myself. The central computer at the center of the barren planet could see everything that was happening in the world at the same time. Yet, when the young girl looked at a certain place, she was looking at herself in that place. If that computer had a soul, it could only have one. It was the one that was here at the moment. The body of this young girl was the container of her soul, and it was also the resting place of her awareness and the channel of interaction with the world. If this soul died along with Hua Xi's body, she would be reborn instantly in the radiance of the charter. Would she still be the same person? Perhaps her soul existed in a form that was beyond the imagination of humans, but it was still simple, for this I was herself. She was certain that she would live forever because of the radiance of the charter, but was her death not death? I think this is the first time you felt truly fearful. Jingjiu's voice didn't contain any threatening emotion. Instead, it had a hint of congratulation. After a moment of silence, Hua Xi said, "No. I had experienced it once in the forest by the railroad tens of thousands of years ago." Jingjiu said, "You'll have some time to experience this fear to make sure that you are still alive. I think you need it." The soul of the greatest machine created by the human civilization was trapped in the fragile and beautiful skin of the young girl she had created, waiting for the end of the long passage of Jia Lei. This period of waiting would be longer than the passage of Jia Lei. It was helpless and hopeless. "Are you threatening me?" she asked, looking at Jingjiu. Jingjiu said, "No need, I have nothing to ask. I'm just telling you that I will kill you. Whether you believe that death here is the end or not, even if you think that the resurrected her on the main star is you, I will kill you anyway. So are you afraid or not? If you are, you will lose." Hua Xi walked to the table and pulled a chair to sit down. After a long silence, she suddenly said, "I can't contact the outside world, and neither can you. You will still be surrounded and killed. Or, can we really reach an agreement?" Jingjiu said, "No need. You can't control this world if you can't contact the outside world, but I can." Hua Xi said, "How can you do it without the transmission of information?" Jingjiu said, "There is a thing called the mind. Although the transmission speed can't exceed the speed of light, there is no need for communication. Now that those children have come out, they will know what to do, and they will kill you as soon as possible." Hua Xi's expression changed slightly, asking, "How do you know they have come out? What are you going to do?" Jingjiu didn't answer this question, because he had just woken up and had no idea what was going on. What he said was of course a trick. Now that he was certain that Zhao Liu and those children had come out, he was certain that they would know what to do at the critical moment. He had merely slept for a while, and the stars had rotated for more than a year, and it had been hundreds of years in Chaotian. Even Jingjiu felt sentimental. Hua Xi suddenly said, "If you want to kill me, just do it. Why do you have to talk so much? These boring and philosophical discussions are the commonplace of the humans. It's unnecessary to waste time on them. So, what is the reason?" Her gaze fell on Jingjiu's wrist. The green rope of light sank into his wrist slowly. Jingjiu's face was a bit pale, with a hint of pain between his eyebrows. "It's the program that controls you, and it's also the brand in your spiritual soul. Of course, it's the sheath that can restrain you." Hua Xi continued with a faint smile, "You are being controlled by it. Even though you are in the isolated space passage, you are still being controlled by it. As soon as you leave the space passage, you will be grabbed by Shen Aoyama. Do you feel scared?" Jingjiu said, "You think too much. I'll sleep again if I can't stand it." This was what he was best at. Chapter 979. By the edge of the atmosphere of the main planet, the observation platform was hovering in silence like those distant space stations. They walked up the stone steps from the building, past the pavilion, and climbed up the cliff. There was a large tree by the cliff, on which a white fruit hung. The cliff was fake, and so was the fruit. It was Ada sleeping on the branch. Sitting by the cliff's edge, Zhao Liu looked down at the planet in silence with her 2 feet dangling in the air. She had been looking at the hot spring among the mountains for many days. Her eyes hadn't blinked, and her posture hadn't changed. The mountains, the hot spring, and the young woman in a bathrobe by the hot spring were the same. It wasn't until a moment ago that the clouds in the sky above the prairie had gradually gathered, and the space was obviously distorted. Countless snowflakes and clouds landed on the surface of the sphere, but they were restrained by an invisible force and flowed slowly along the curve. Looking from the space, it looked like a snowball. It was the effect of the gravitational field. The young woman in a bathrobe by the hot spring had never paid attention to her, and let her look at it casually. Why did the gravitational field suddenly activate? The gravitational field could not only block the sight, but it was also a perfect defense that was almost impossible to break through. Do it, Zhao Lei suddenly said. A bright red sword light illuminated the cliff platform, the trees, and this area of the atmosphere. It looked like the setting sun. Hundreds of pure sword wills drifted out from the rims of her clothing, making a sizzling sound. Ran Handong, Zhong Lizi, and Jiang Yuxiao were startled, wondering if she intended to attack the gravitational field. Why didn't she do it a few days ago when the gravitational field hadn't been fully activated? And she had said that someone else would do it. Zhao Lei had been staring at the young woman in a bathrobe for many days, and she had also been stared at for many days. It was unclear how many satellites, railguns, battleships, and observation devices on the ground had been watching her even the slightest movement. As soon as she uttered the word, "Do it," the surveillance network had analyzed the situation and captured the sword wills. Boom! Boom! Hundreds of bright light balls appeared on the surface of the planet. Each of the light balls was a laser cannon. The straight and dreadful light beams were heading toward the cliff platform by the edge of the atmosphere. In the meantime, a dozen battleships in the distant deep space outside the galaxy had started attacking as well. What was more troublesome was that the main railguns outside the atmosphere also fired at the same time. In a very short period of time, the main planet's defense system was fully activated and launched a destructive attack on the cliff platform. Countless beams of light and long-range weapons shook the entire planet and even the entire galaxy. Without a doubt, this was an attack that had been planned for a long time and had gone through countless calculations. It was also an attack that was designed to be super-saturated. Since the female priest could be regarded as the protector of the Federation of the Milky Way, she would be protected by the entire Federation of the Milky Way. Zhao Lei's intention to attack her would definitely cause a strong reaction, just like now. Except for the war against the Sea of Dark Matter, the Federation of the Milky Way had never employed such a large amount of energy on a single target in the history of the Federation of the Milky Way. Would Zhao Lei be able to withstand such a large-scale attack? Even if she could survive this violent attack, what about Fang Jitai, the cliff, the three girls, and the tree? As soon as the red light of the thoughtless sword appeared, it was drowned out by the countless lights that illuminated the universe. The faces of the three girls turned pale under the light. In the next moment, their lives would be swallowed by the torrents of energy along with the cliff. It was then that the white fruit on the tree suddenly bloomed and turned into a white flower. The white flower had a soft and silky appearance, looking like a dandelion. The dandelion swayed with the wind, but it didn't break into pieces. Instead, it grew larger at an unimaginable speed, enveloping the entire cliff platform. The dazzling laser beams, the particle guns, and the electromagnetic cannons shot out by the railguns had all landed on it. No explosion took place, not even a sound. The large white dandelion didn't change at all. The laser beams and the advanced weapons had no effect on it, and it was unclear where they had gone. It was like a raindrop falling into the ocean or a breath falling into the clouds. There was a large space station that belonged to the Science Academy of the Federation on the orbit of a few thousand kilometers outside the atmosphere of the main planet. A handsome middle-aged professor stood in front of the light screen, remaining silent. The workers and scientists in the space station looked at the scenes on the light screen and the reports and analyses of the surveillance data transmitted from various places. They were shocked, speechless, their faces pale, wondering what was going on. This place was not the headquarters of the attack, and the handsome middle-aged professor was not the commander. The attack was a program generated by the central computer of the Federation. All the military had to do was execute it. Yet, this middle-aged professor was not an ordinary person. His name was Qing Shuang, the president of the Union of Tianpu University, a man who was superior to the scientific circle of the Federation of the Milky Way, and an ascended ferryman from Chaotian. His name was Qing Shuang when he picked the flowers at the Dongyi Taoist temple. Seeing the large white dandelion on the light screen, Qing Shuang raised his eyebrows, knowing that the attack had failed. The red sword light had left the cliff platform and landed on the surface of the planet before the attack arrived. However, he was not worried about the situation on the surface of the planet. That person was protected by the gravitational field, so he was safe. What he needed to deal with was the cat. The divine animals of Chaotian were more powerful than the human cultivation practitioners after they came to this world. However, the cat had blocked the attack of the whole planet stupidly. Even if it was not wounded severely, it must have consumed a great deal of fairy energy. How could it withstand his thunderous attack? The large white dandelion swayed slightly at the edge of the atmosphere, as if it were being swayed by the wind. It was Ada who was shaking his head. It was easy to imagine how big he was now, since he was holding the entire observation platform in his stomach. He looked rather naive and adorable when he shook his head, but the expression in his eyes was full of disdain and mockery, which meant, "You guys are not good enough." In the gloomy cliff, Jiang Yuxia held a pillar in the pavilion with a pale face. Ran Handong looked at the white hair falling down from the sky with widened eyes. Zhong Lizi guessed that it was Ada. She reached out her hand to touch him curiously. Feeling itchy, Ada sneezed. An unimaginably violent airflow came out from his mouth and nose, tearing apart the protective shield outside the observation platform easily and causing the thin air at the edge of the atmosphere to form a windstorm. Countless extremely hot light particles were spurted out from its body along with the storm. A few satellites nearby and one of the orbiters were instantly hit with many holes, falling apart. Those light particles were the remnants of the previous supersaturated attack. Had he swallowed all the lasers, particle guns and electromagnetic weapons into his stomach? Was it like the starlight? Evil creature! I'm Qing of Dongyi. The handsome middle-aged professor yelled at Ada sternly after he left the space station and flew to the edge of the atmosphere. Before he could finish his sentence, it was because Ada had already struck. A hairy and adorable hand reached out from the huge white dandelion. A few bright cold lights appeared as the tip of the paw reached out. The cat waved its paw. A few obvious cracks appeared at the edge of the atmosphere. The immortal ascendant of Dongyi Dao, Qing Shuang, was hit before he could react. The cold lights were the paw lights and the sword lights. They were the true, experienced and pure sword work of Aoyama. His cloth was torn to shreds along with the tearing sound. Qing Shuang disappeared from the original spot, turning into a flash of light and heading toward the deep part of the dark space. Bitch! A cold intent flashed in Ada's eyes. I'm the White Ghost, the principal guard of Aoyama. What an evil creature! All the cities on the surface of the main planet were in a state of chaos. The alarms and screams could be heard everywhere. It was unclear whether the sea of dark matter had invaded the cities or the terrorists had done something. The people fled in all directions. In an apartment building, the alarms had been ringing for a while. A couple was about to evacuate to the underground construction. The husband found his wife standing by the window in a daze while holding a few pieces of clothing. He couldn't help but yell angrily, "What are you doing there?" Looking at the sky outside the window, the wife murmured nervously, "Cat, cat." The husband was even more irritated. He ran behind her and grabbed her arm, yelling, "What's so nice about a cat?" The wife yelled while pointing at the outside of the window crazily, "Have you ever seen such a big cat?" The husband was taken aback. Looking at the sky outside the window, he opened his mouth wide in shock, unable to utter a word. More and more people noticed the peculiar phenomenon in the sky. The screams could be heard in the streets and buildings of various cities. Some people even passed out due to the fear. There was a white cat in the sky. The white cat had a huge body, and the long hair hanging down looked like the clouds. The cloud-like hair seemed soft, but with just a gentle brush, a space elevator was broken. It blocked the light of the distant star, and the shadow cast on the surface of the planet stretched for thousands of kilometers. Ada landed in the northern hemisphere, but it didn't cause the earth to shake, mountains to shake, and tsunamis. It was as soft as a real dandelion. There was a grassland in the northern hemisphere, and there was a huge snowball in the grassland. It was the mountains, the old city, and the hot spring covered by the gravitational field. Just as the immortal from Dong Taoism thought, no one could break the gravitational field by force, not even Zhao Liu's thoughtless sword. But that huge snowball, in front of Ada, looked like a real snowball. Ada raised his right paw and fell on the snowball, like a playful kitten holding down the ball of string thrown by its master. A soft sound was heard. The whole planet heard this sound. Snowflakes were falling, the north wind was blowing, and the clouds were broken. The mountains, the ancient city, and the hot spring were all revealed. The girl in a bathrobe sat by the hot spring, looked up at the broken sky, and saw the white cat. Chapter 980. Before the supersaturated attack of the Federation of the Milky Way landed on the platform on the square cliff, Zhao Liu had already left the edge of the atmosphere and arrived on the ground together with the thoughtless sword, landing in the garden of the ancient castle where she had been before. The thoughtless sword had the fastest speed among the main swords of Aoyama. She had the acquired shapeless sword body, and after studying the ghost sword method left by Nanchu with Lu Shisui, she possessed a speed that was beyond the imagination of the immortals who had ascended. The branch Qing had perched on had been broken into two halves, falling onto the grass. Many corpses were lying on the grass, and various liquids of various colors were flowing out from the wounds. It seemed that they were the cyborgs. There were also many butlers and waiters who, like their companions, had collapsed at their respective posts. In merely a few seconds, all the people in the ancient castle of the Hua clan had died. There was not a single human left. Zhao Liu was surprised by the result. It was then that a spiritual awareness arrived from the distant north, followed by a thunderous boom. Zhao Liu retrieved the thoughtless sword and tossed it over forcefully. The thoughtless sword broke through the forest and the courtyard full of the smell of the cyborgs, drawing a slightly curved blood-red line in the sky. Its speed grew faster and faster, and it arrived among the mountains in the north in the blink of an eye like a real ray of light. The huge gravitational field enshrouding the mountains had been crushed by the larger white cat as if he were stepping on a snowball. No barrier could separate the sacred from the human world and the ancient times from the present. The black hair in front of the girl in the bathrobe swayed slightly and then dropped down, as if a pair of scissors had passed by her. The blood-red sword light passed through the fog above the hot spring and her body, and halted in midair, displaying the appearance of the thoughtless sword. The expression in the eyes of the girl was calm and nonchalant, or rather indifferent, devoid of the astonishment and fear that a human should have. Crack! Crack! Her body dropped down like the black hair. All of her existence had turned into dust and drifted into the hot spring, gradually sinking to the bottom of the water. The gentle breeze blew over, dispersing the hot air in the area. The sword lights continued to disappear along with the sword lights until they were absorbed into the sleeve. It was Zhao Liu's sleeve. In the blink of an eye, she arrived at this place that was thousands of kilometers away from the Hua family's ancient castle. She gripped the thoughtless sword once again. The huge figure in the sky disappeared without a trace. Ada landed beside her along with the falling snow. It sensed the omnipresent information particles between heaven and earth, looked at Zhao Liu with a rather tired gaze, and issued another warning. Killing the girl in the bathrobe did not mean that he had killed that person. If the other party regained control of the entire charter network, this assassination would end in failure. In the distant universe, the Galactic Guard fleet was preparing for the Second War. The question was, where was that person? Did he leave? Or was it that he could walk freely in the information network and did not need to deliberately hide? I'm not even here, so how can you kill me? A slightly mechanical electronic voice rang out from the building behind the hot spring. At the same time, all the equipment in the building complex that could produce sound also repeated this sentence. It sounded like a religious hymn, giving people a solemn, sacred, profound, and untouchable feeling. Don't believe her. Ada's spiritual awareness enshrouded the mountains, saying coldly and nonchalantly, no matter whether it's the backup program or the life of the cat, the Godhead or the personality, the second personality or the 80,000 personalities, it won't be a problem as long as we kill all of them. The electronic voice was still echoing in the mountains and the city. I'm omnipresent. I can't be killed. Zhao Liu didn't even listen to it. She took out the green sky mirror with a twist of her right hand and pressed it on the ground beside her. A burning sound could be heard on the wooden floor, and the hot fog in the hot spring grew thicker instantly. Countless faint green lights came out from the complicated patterns on the back of the green sky mirror, heading toward the underground and in all directions. The central computer of the Federation of the Milky Way used a coreless architecture, which was the only way to ensure the safety of that mechanical life. Like what the electronic voice said, that person couldn't be killed. What did Zhao Liu intend to do? In the deep end of the mountains, there was a large cluster of superprocessors, consisting of more than 5,000 terminals. There was a similar cluster in a warehouse in the deep end of the ancient city. Zhao Liu sat by the hot spring with her eyes closed. The thoughtless sword hovered in silence 3 feet above her head, quivering once in a while. Innumerable formidable sword wills shot out along with the light of the green sky mirror and entered those calculation cores easily, starting to destroy them. You can't find me. The electronic voice was getting slower and slower, and it sounded a little strange. Looking at the residual energy of the gravitational field falling down like the snowflakes in the sky, Ada showed a hint of mockery in his eyes, in addition to brutality and cruelty. Zhao Liu still didn't heed the voice. She used the fairy energy to generate tens of thousands of sword wills with her eyes closed. Under the guidance of the green sky mirror, the sword wills headed toward the programs in each computing core and all the chip. All the signal sources in the mountains, the cities and the distant cities were shut down as long as they were within the range of the main planet. The communication channels between the satellites outside the atmosphere and the space station were also disconnected. A strange event had occurred in the cities on the main planet. Dozens of women felt a sudden pain at the back of their necks, as if they had been bitten by mosquitoes. Some of these women were waitresses, some were students, some were delinquent girls who had run away from home, and some were married wives. They had their own lives, but they all had the same facial features. They had no idea what their original mission in life was, nor did they know what was happening at the moment, nor did they know that the chips on the back of their necks had been completely destroyed by the pain. In a very short span of a dozen seconds, the 2 backup databases and supercomputing cores of the Alliance's central computer in the underground and in the ancient city were shut down. Like Hua Shi, the girl who was regarded as a backup body also obtained a little bit of freedom. The gravitational field in the sky had been broken, losing its isolating effect. Before this happened, Zhao Liu had completed the second layer of isolating the gravitational field. It sounded simple, but it was actually hard to imagine. She was neither the snow girl nor a mechanical being. She was a real human being. Can the all-in-one sword be used this way? Ada remarked sentimentally. At the moment, Zhao Liu's face was pale, and her hair was a bit messy due to the wind. She looked like a regular student. Yet, in his eyes, she exuded the purest sword wills at the moment. She was so beautiful that nothing could compare to her. If he were not so tired, he would definitely go and have a good chat with her. Zhao Lei opened her eyes and lifted her right hand from the surface of the green sky mirror. "I'll leave the rest to you," she said. Having said that, she reached out her hand to summon the wooden tray, filled it with the strong liquor, and drank it up. Her face was indeed pale, and her hair was a bit messy, but her eyes were still as bright as before, with distinct black and white parts. There was a barren and ordinary planet in the deep part of the distant universe. This planet was not on the astronomical sequence of the Federation of the Milky Way, nor was it recorded in any records. This planet had no mineral resources, which could be easily found out through the long-distance detection of the rays. Yet, many unmanned spaceships carrying a great deal of resources had arrived on this planet since a certain year, and then left, disappearing without a trace. The surface of the planet was unchanged, and no trace of human activity could be found. Yet, the deep part of the planet had become a different world. The temperature, the gas density and composition, the energy conveyor belt, and the encrypted data channel were all designed perfectly. It was true that the temperature and atmosphere were the result of the design. If the central computer of the Federation of the Milky Way had a concrete body, it would be here. Countless black devices were arranged in a formation, exuding the vague sword wills of Aoyama. They had been modified by the cultivation practitioners. The green mechanical words fell down on the light screen like a waterfall. Nobody could see them clearly. All of a sudden, a tiny ripple formed on the green words, which then spread out gradually. The ripple did not cover a large area, and it spread out very slowly, but it felt like an avalanche that couldn't be stopped. After a long while, the ripple had finally stopped, but it didn't mean that everything had returned to normal. In the center of the light screen, the green mechanical words were flashing regularly, looking like a pair of wings flying up and down. They looked like a bluebird. Before the war broke out, Zhao Lei told Ran Handong and the others on the observation platform at the edge of the atmosphere of the main planet that it was not her who had attacked the girl, nor was it Ada. It was Qing who had attacked the girl. Many days ago, when Zhao Lei came to the main planet for the first time and met the girl in the castle of the Hua clan, the blue bird had been watching their conversation in silence on a tree branch, ready to take over the girl's body at any moment. However, it was because the girl was everywhere and could travel freely in the charter network and leave the scene at any time. As such, Qing didn't do anything until the conversation was over. That girl's soul was sealed in Hua Xi's body that day. Zhao Lei and Ada killed the girl in the bathrobe on the main planet and destroyed the backup system. They tried their best to isolate the system so that the central computer wouldn't produce a new soul. The central computer or the charter network was now a soulless shell. Qing had finally found a chance to take control of it. It was a kind of possession on another level. The fog on the surface of the hot spring was still as thick as ever. Ada crouched by Zhao Lei obediently. He had consumed a great deal of his fairy energy and mental energy to dismantle the large gravitational field. Sitting by the hot spring, Zhao Lei filled the wine cup in her hand and emptied it again, indicating that she was nervous as well. Ada suddenly pricked up his ears and crawled behind her gingerly to hide behind her. Ha 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 ha! Countless laughter broke out in the buildings and the ancient city. We've made it! I've taken control of this damn thing. What should we do next? The slightly mechanical electronic voice had gradually become smooth and lively, turning into a girl's voice. Zhao Lei set down the wine cup and said, "Take control of all the battleships and weapon bases, including the space station and the mining planet." Before she could finish, Qing anxious voice rang out, "No, the remote physical control is limited." Zhao Lei had a conversation with that girl before she left the Stargate base on the huge mecha. Through that conversation, she was certain that it was indeed difficult to control the central computer physically, but there should be a way to bypass the permission. Unfortunately, she was pressed for time and didn't have time to find a way. Fortunately, she had made other preparations beforehand. Ran Handong is sending a program to you. The program will make all the battleships think they are about to enter the warped black hole and lock themselves. Then you can change all the awakening signals. Chinger said happily, "It's a great idea. I've seen the permission rules. Those battleships can't open themselves." "Well, I've already sent the order to all the battleships. What should we do next? Take over the terminals of the government departments?" "No," said Zhao Lei. "We need to find a way to control the Snow Girl." Chapter 981. The Jialei Passage was indeed the longest space passage discovered by the humans. While the huge battleship that evacuated the populace was still isolated from the outside world in the passage, the battleships that had received the order to besiege her had increased from more than 300 to more than 1,000, and 3 ascendants had arrived at the same time. Now, there were already 6 immortals and a medium-sized fleet in the universe outside the Grey Passage. In the previous battles against the Sea of Dark Matter, such a powerful force was enough to solve all the problems, no matter how dangerous the situation was. The expression on Chen Yu's face was as cold as ever, and the devil man in black standing behind him remarked, "We still can't defeat her." Even though the Snow Girl had lost most of her strength in the battle against the 9 Dark Ones, she still couldn't defeat her. This was the unshakable understanding of the cultivation practitioners in Chaotian. Their fear of the Queen was like the black hole that the human civilization didn't dare approach. It was enough to shake the firmest Tao heart and the strongest willpower. "The universe is very large, and the speed of light is very slow," said Chinya. As long as one was in this universe, one had to obey the physical rules of the universe, and the Snow Girl was no exception. Her speed couldn't exceed the speed of light. As such, her destructive power would be weakened by the distance in such a large space in the universe, making it possible for her to be defeated. The other devil man in black said with narrowed eyes, "If she is indeed a life form built on the basis of negative entropy as we have guessed over the years, and she can survive indefinitely in the cold universe, but this life form is more suitable to fight against the monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter, not the nuclear weapons. The battleships can pose a great threat to her, otherwise why has she been hiding all these years?" The devil man in black shot him a sideways glance and said in a mocking tone, "Do you think Her Majesty is hiding from us and these battleships?" Chen Yi said expressionlessly, "No matter how powerful she is, I believe she will still die if she is thrown into the permanent star. The laser cannons, plasma cannons, and most importantly, the gravitational field output equipment on the battleships should be useful." Hearing this, the 2 devil men in black didn't say anything more. It was because this was not Chen Yu's judgment, nor was it the result of the Ascendant's deduction, but the plan given by that person. The central computer wouldn't make a mistake in this regard, at least not yet. More than 1,000 battleships outside the Jialei Passage had activated their weapon systems and were ready to carry out the plan. The command ship that Chen Yu and the 2 black-clad Yao Immortals were on was at the forefront of the entire fleet. It was responsible for the most important task, which was to capture the gravitational field. At this moment, a mechanical and cold electronic beep suddenly sounded in the battleship. "The warship is about to enter the spatial passage. All systems prepare to shut down." Chen Yu's face swiftly sank. The 2 black-clad Yao Immortals were quick to react as well. Instantly, they used their divine senses to invade the command system. They wanted to stop it, but it was already too late. Following the mechanical electronic beep, the gravitational field generator in front of the command ship slowly retracted, followed by the plasma cannons and various weapon bases. The officers and soldiers in the command ship were extremely shocked. They stood in front of the control panel and kept operating, but even the divine senses of the two black-robed demon immortals could not stop all this, so how could they do it? Someone shouted blankly, "What's going on? Why are they all ineffective?" Remote command, with the highest authority, directly bypassing the system wall and activating the warship's self-locking program. The two black-robed monster immortals looked at Chun-Yi and quickly transmitted the results of the investigation with their divine senses. Their faces were somewhat pale. That remote command made the command system of the battleship believe that they were about to enter a spatial passage, so the battleship had to enter a completely sealed state. It was also called the state of absolute silence. Any attempt to break the state of silence on the battleship, regardless of whether it was done internally or externally, would trigger the self-explosion of the battleship. It was because the spacecrafts in the warped black holes were not allowed to conduct any observation. This was the iron law of space navigation in the Federation of the Milky Way, or rather, the Federation of the Distant Ancient Civilization. As for why it was so, it was only known by the early experiments of the human civilization and the central computer left behind. Later, with the appearance of the Sea of Dark Matter, some people had vaguely guessed the truth. Like the human's understanding of the quantum world, observation would always bring about problems. This iron law of space navigation solved the problem fundamentally. It was crude and low-level, but it was safe. Nobody had expected that this iron law would be used by someone to deal with the battleship one day. The two black-clad Yao immortals didn't look so terrible because the battleship was sealed. They could break out of the battleship by force, and the self-explosion of the battleship wouldn't hurt them. The real reason was who had issued the order with the highest authority. It was a simple conjecture, but it led to a shocking and disturbing conclusion. The mechanical and monotonous electronic voice was still ringing. Chun-Yi and the officers and soldiers on the battleship had never found this sound so annoying. The weapon system had been retracted, and the observation system was being shut down one by one. The engine was being shut down, and the high composite material plates were falling down from the top of the battleship, giving off a dull and annoying grinding sound. The same thing was happening on the other 1,000 battleships in the other places in the universe, on the portable space stations, on the mining spaceships, and on all the spacecrafts that could travel through the space. The sudden change had caused a great deal of chaos. It was rare for the universe to be as lively as it was at this moment. It was impossible for the battleship to enter the state of absolute silence in an instant, but it still had some time to react. Chun-Yi, the two black-clad Yao immortals, and the other immortals on the battleship flew out of the battleship as soon as they could and arrived in the vacuum. They didn't forget to bring the supermicro nuclear power furnace with them. Some swordsmen in the military intended to leave the battleship in the mechas, but they were strictly stopped by Chun-Yi in the command system. He knew very well that the coming battle would be very dangerous, and that even the Star State generals would be of no use except to die. The 1,000 battleships outside the Gray Passage thus entered the state of silence, and could no longer receive any signals from inside. The pale blue flame at the rear of the engines had also been extinguished, and even the dim reflection of the hull seemed to have disappeared, turning into a lifeless existence. Chun-Yi looked back at the battleships as if he was looking at 1,000 coffins. His eyes became extremely cold as he thought that the 100,000 battleships in the three fleets might have become like this. He pressed the wristband to switch the channel and entered the quantum communication system specially built for the cocoon breakers. He confirmed the situation in other places and realized that it was as he had expected, and realized that the worst-case scenario had become true. There was a problem with the central computer. He knew that Zhao Liu, who had been watching that person from the main planet, had done something, although he didn't know how she did it. Fortunately, according to the rules left by the gods, the central computer could not directly perform physical operations, at least in this aspect. Otherwise, Zhao Leia would only need to order the battleships to attack them, and they would have no choice but to flee. Xing Ju's voice rang in the quantum communication system, followed by the voices of more ascenders. The wisdom and decisiveness of the fairies far exceeded that of ordinary people. None of them were sealed in the silent battleships, but they were still somewhere in the distant universe. Without the battleships, they could not rush here to participate in the battle. Chenya turned to look at the dark exit of the gray passage that was glowing faintly, and thought of that sentence again. The exit was the entrance. He thought of this sentence at that time, not because he wanted to rush into the space passage to fight, but because he thought that whether he stood in the well or outside, the well's mouth was the same in his eyes. "What do we do next?" a demonic immortal in black asked. "That's good. Next is the battle between us." Chenya took out a gray stone pestle, and then a magical weapon that looked like a green rope, slowly and attentively wrapping it around the pestle. Even without the battleships, the powerful long-range weapons, and the gravitational field capture device, he still did not think that he would lose. No one saw the scene of the final battle of Full Moon, but he firmly believed that no matter how powerful Snow Girl was, she must be extremely weak after killing the 9 virgins. As for Jingjiu, as long as he did not dare to wake up, what difference was there between him and a dead man? The giant battleship was still moving forward in the gray passage. Actually, the word forward was not accurate to describe that state, but because no one had observed it in the passage, any description could be used, but it would not be accurate. This was a place that was truly isolated from the rest of the world. If it was Zhuoruzhui, who had been educated by many early works of human civilization on the homeworld, he would easily associate the word paradise with the word paradise. But this was not a real paradise. People could not stay away from the conflicts of the human world for long. Sooner or later, they would have to leave, and even the longest gray passage could only allow them to escape for a little longer. The soldiers on the battleship and the evacuating civilians did not need to think about these problems. They were all in deep hibernation. Only Jingjiu, Snow Girl, and Hua Shi were awake. Not counting the ancestral masters of Aoyama, who were far away on the homeworld, they were the current rulers of human civilization. Hua Shi sat on the chair, her face expressionless. Jingjiu sat on the chair opposite her, the green rope of light sinking deeper into his wrist. It looked like it was already in his flesh. The green rope of light was on his wrist, but the pain was between his eyebrows. The pain was like a heavy stone, pressing on him, making him dizzy and extremely uncomfortable. It was like a serious sinus infection for ordinary people. It was not a blunt knife cutting the flesh, but a wooden hammer pounding on your face, trying to flatten your face. Even he could not bear the annoying pain that came from the depths of his spirit, his face turning paler than Snow Girl's. He poured himself a glass of hard liquor, which he rarely did. He looked at it but did not drink it. He said to Snow Girl, "I vaguely remember, on the field, you." Snow Girl understood what he meant. She looked at him sympathetically and disdainfully, like a shepherd looking at a dog. She reached out her chubby little hand and placed it between his eyes, passing an extremely cold breath to him. A streak of frost instantly formed on Jingjiu's eyelashes, and his ordinary face suddenly had an eerie sense of beauty. After a while, he shivered, the green rope of light on his wrist dimmed a little, the pain between his eyebrows also lessened a lot, followed by a change in his eyes. His eyes became a little blank, it seemed like he had forgotten something. If his successor can control the central computer, it means that you will be controlled by him. Maybe it was because she saw Jingjiu's state. Hua Shi suddenly said such a sentence to Snow Girl. It was a very obvious but not clumsy attempt to sow discord. Existences like Snow Girl and Jingjiu cared most about their own existence. The word existence here already meant free existence. They absolutely could not accept being controlled by others, no matter how. Snow Girl ignored Hua Shi, maybe because she was a little tired, and did not want to talk. Jingju put down the wine cup in his hand, looked at Hua Shi, and explained slowly and seriously. I just didn't finish my sentence. You probably don't know, she made me accept her request when I was not awake. Hua Shi's body was now filled with that girl's consciousness. She really did not see that scene. She said in shock and anger, "You are actually willing to become her sword rather than Shin Aoyama's sword to fight for humanity? If I fight for you, I might die." Jingju seemed to be drunk, and said with a lisp, "And just like you said, those children can now control her, so there is a balance between us. Control on both sides means no control." Hua Shi was silent for a while, and then said, "Not on both sides. Now it means that your successors can indirectly control you." Jingju said, "You think too much." Hua Shi said, "How can you be sure that after not seeing them for hundreds of years, they are still them?" Jingju rubbed the area between his eyebrows tiredly, and said, "This war is over, let's not talk anymore." Hua Shi said sarcastically, "Do you really think that this war has already been decided?" Jingju said, "Yes, after the Snow Girl recovers, we will go and kill Shin Aoyama." Hua Shi said with a smile, "I think you don't know enough about the Grandmaster of your sect. If you work together, you might really be able to kill him. The problem is that you don't even dare to wake up and appear in front of him. Do you really think that the Snow Girl is invincible?" The Snow Girl turned around and looked at her with her black eyes. Her expression was indifferent as she let out two moans. Time passed slowly. No one in the huge battleship spoke anymore. The light music played automatically by the system had stopped at some point. Maybe the Snow Girl thought it was too noisy. They were about to reach the end of the Jialei passage, and they did not know how far they were from the exit. The Snow Girl suddenly reached out and released a cold will. A huge ice block froze Hua Shi in the middle. The ice block was not completely solid. There was enough space for her to turn around and stretch her body. It was obvious that this was not ordinary water that had turned into ice. The ice was unimaginably solid, and it was also much colder than 0 degrees Celsius. Hua Shi's small face quickly turned red, and then white. She stared at the Snow Girl through the ice block and said, "Are you really not afraid that if you kill me, there will be another me outside?" The Snow Girl turned around and ignored her. Hua Shi suddenly felt that this feeling was very familiar. At least, her body was very familiar, as if she had experienced the same thing before. Jingju explained, "I can roughly remember that for the past year, she would freeze you like this every night." Hua Shi opened her eyes wide and asked in shock, "Why?" Jingju said, "It should be an experiment to see if you can be completely cut off from the outside world. With the Snow Girl's cultivation level, and the continuous experiment or practice for more than a year, there would definitely be no loopholes. This scheme that started from the underground sewers was too terrifying." Feeling hopeless, Hua Shi had no choice but to throw out the last straw, saying, "But you two still love the humans." The scheme that the Snow Girl and Jingjiu had set up from the underground sewers was, in essence, to obtain the freedom. The so-called freedom was to get rid of the mission given to them by that god, and it also meant to give up the responsibility toward the humans. What Hua Shi said was exactly what she meant. Jingjiu and the Snow Girl looked at Hua Shi in silence, as if they thought her question was ridiculous. Hua Shi folded her arms, looking at Jingjiu's eyes as if she was praying or praising him. "On the full moon planet, you helped those people open the alloy door and killed so many monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter," she said earnestly. Then, she turned to the Snow Girl and said, "You took a great risk to wipe out the 9 Dark Ones." It was true that they seemed to be indifferent and unfeeling, staying in the residential buildings of Foggy City, but they had done so many things in the end. What was it if not love? "You think too much," said Jingjiu. Chapter 982. Besides saying that he thought too much, Jingju didn't give any further explanation. It was because the reason why he went to the underground base and killed those monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter had nothing to do with him. Whether you admit it or not, we're not real humans. For the sake of humans, we're fighting here and there, talking about life and death. Is it because of the 3 laws? Or was it the urge and desire to become a god? Of course it's for love. Alright, let's not talk about it. Hua Xi's gaze passed through the ice and fell on Jingju's face. She asked the last question. Based on the principle of uncertainty, you won't kill me. Instead, you plan to imprison me until the end of time. Have you ever thought about what to do with this little girl? Hua Xi was a young girl with an independent personality and soul. Now, she had become a cage that imprisoned the young girl's soul. If Jingju wanted to keep the young girl locked up, Hua Xi would never be able to wake up. It was no different from death. If it was any other human, Jingju naturally wouldn't care about their life or death. However, Hua Xi had been Hua Xi most of the time, from the Stargate base to the moon-gazing planet. She had accompanied him for a long time as his secretary, tour guide, and younger sister, and had cooked breakfast and steamed cakes for him many times. This was indeed a difficult question to answer. Even he did not know how to answer it, so he closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, they were clean, innocent, and alienated, as if he had turned back into the autistic young man who played the piano by the window. Sister, you didn't sleep today. Why are you in the ice? He looked at the flower stream in the ice and asked curiously. Hua Xi said helplessly, If I don't know how to answer, then I'll turn back into a fool. Isn't that too shameless? Jingju didn't understand what she was saying and felt a little tired. Looking at Xue Jie on the table, he subconsciously reached out and hugged her. Xue Jie glanced at him and made sure that he had really turned back into that sick and lonely young man, and that he was not pretending. She then ignored him. Hua Xi put down her hands and looked at them outside the ice block. She knew that she couldn't convince them, so she closed her eyes and started to rest. It was like returning to that building, just like those ordinary nights. The battleship was silent. Tens of thousands of humans were sleeping with them. After an unknown amount of time, when Jingju opened his eyes and woke up, an extremely faint ray of light shone through the window. The battleship had already left the Gray Passage and arrived at the universe space of the main star field. At this time, they still didn't know that the central computer had changed the wake-up signal. Only their battleships were able to automatically lift the absolute silence state after leaving the spatial channel as usual. Countless plates made of high-strength materials were flipped open one by one. Like scales being blown by the wind, countless silver lines appeared on the surface of the battleship. Strangely enough, the onboard computer did not issue an automatic notification, nor did it issue any command. After a few seconds, as if there was some kind of buffer, a clear and pleasant voice sounded in the warship. "Hello, everyone." Jingju felt like he had heard this voice somewhere before. He scratched his head but couldn't remember where. Ah, this is a very rare action. I mean, it happened to you. Not only is it a little cute, but your face is also much cuter than before. But what happened to you? Can't you tell who I am? Who are you? I'm... The voice paused for a moment and then said again, the most beloved girl, Qing'er, whom you can't bear to deceive the most. Really? Asked Jingju bewilderedly. Qing'er coughed twice and said earnestly, Long time no see, Jingjiu. I'm here to take you home. There were many battleships floating in the universe outside the Gray Passage. The space was too vast, and it didn't feel densely packed. However, it was still full of visual impact, especially when those battleships were sealed. There was no signal or aura leaking out, just like a coffin. Hua Xi gazed at the scenes on the light screen through the ice, her eyebrows furrowed slightly. Her conjecture in the spatial channel had all been confirmed. The central computer had indeed been controlled by Zhao Lei. As for how she had done it, the silly voice talking to Jingjiu had explained everything. The true spirit of the heavenly treasure in Chaotian and the machine intelligence were indeed of the same origin. That was why it could replace her. Hua Shi pulled back her gaze and interrupted the boring and silly conversation, asking, "Are you sure you can leave on this battleship?" No sooner had she said this than the ear-piercing alarm rang out on the battleship. It meant that the long-range detection system had discovered that the battleship was locked on by a powerful weapon, and it was possible that the attack of the enemy had already arrived. Oops, I've missed something. The speed of the battleship is almost zero after leaving the spatial channel, and it needs a long time to accelerate. It's easy to be attacked during this process. Those immortals of the previous generations, how could they have ion cannons? How could they be used? Ching Er's panicked voice echoed in the battleship. She didn't know how to deal with the current situation. The light screen had already detected the source of the danger. It was an expressionless middle-aged general with a grave expression on his face. The black overcoat on his body hung down naturally in the windless space. There was a small base of a plasma cannon in front of him. Two devil immortals in black clothing were further behind, holding a few magic treasures in their hands, emitting a faint glow. This was a formation that looked simple, but was actually quite ingenious. The base of the plasma cannon was in the center of the formation, and it had already been activated. Using a formation to activate the plasma cannon was a continuation of General Li's line of thought and philosophy. Looking at the image on the light screen, Jingjiu had a puzzled and curious look in his eyes. He didn't remember who Chunya was, nor did he know that the plasma cannon was the dreadful weapon that had beheaded the Scorching Sun battleship years ago. All he felt was that he had seen this scene in the movie theater of Foggy City, and Master Eve had accompanied him back then. On the screen, a fog-like object appeared in front of the plasma cannon. It was a sign that the launch had been completed. Jingjiu didn't know any of this. He looked at the image on the light screen curiously. The next moment, he found himself on the light screen, or more precisely, in space. The Snow Girl led him and Hua Shi, who was encased in ice, out of the battleship. The three of them were floating in front of the battleship. The beams of light formed by the plasma cannon illuminated the battleships in the dark space, turning the whole world into a graveyard. How could they resist the plasma cannon that could melt alloys? If the Snow Girl chose to evade, the battleship behind her would be destroyed. The tens of thousands of evacuees in the battleship who were slowly waking up would all die. It was shameful, but it was useful. Why would she care if Chunya didn't care? It was true that the Snow Girl didn't care about the lives of humans. But she cared that someone was trying to challenge her supreme position, just like when the full moon planet was facing the 9 black suns. As a result, she didn't choose to evade. She grabbed Jingjiu's hand and swung it forward. It was like waving a wooden stick to hit a stone thrown at her from the opposite side. It was like how Jingjiu had smashed Gu Qing's sword into the cliff by the sword-washing stream with the iron sword that looked like a fire stick many years ago. Even though it was a powerful plasma cannon that was approaching at the speed of light, she still hit it accurately. To be more precise, the beam of the plasma cannon was blocked by Jingjiu's compact and smooth body. There was no sound or explosion. The plasma beam was blocked and returned to the other side of the universe at an absolutely precise angle. The base of the plasma cannon disintegrated at a speed visible to the naked eye and then dissipated. Soon after, the plasma cannon fell on the formation. The formation melted in an instant, which served as a barrier for Chunya. The terrifying power penetrated the formation and fell into the void. Chunya suffered some minor injuries. The immortal blood on his cloak turned into a fireball. The 2 demon immortals in black were directly thrown thousands of kilometers away. Their faces were pale and they were shocked, speechless. The other 3 immortals who were ready to attack subconsciously stopped. What was going on? Even if Jingjiu could block the laser cannon, how could he block the plasma cannon? They quickly understood. It was the all-in-one sword that Her Majesty the Queen was holding. Looking at the entire universe and the history of human civilization, was there a more powerful combination than this? So that's how the 9 virgins on planet Moongazer died. The essence of the universe was darkness. The light emitted by the countless stars in the distance was like a cup of water, passing through just like that, leaving no radiance behind. The space transfer station outside the Grey Passage had been closed. One could faintly hear the staff inside smashing the wall. More than 1,000 battleships hovered in the darkness in silence like coffins. Your Majesty, we've always respected you in Chaotian. I believe you know that we don't have and don't want to have any malicious intent toward you. We have never thought of controlling you. Now that you are not threatened by anything, please enjoy your time and this universe freely. As for the affairs of the humans, I hope you can let us handle them ourselves. Chenya said this gravely while looking at the white dot in the distance. The 2 demon immortals in black and the other 3 immortals flew behind him, expressing their support for what he said by remaining silent. There was no medium in the universe, but it was not difficult for a ferryman like Chenya to make a sound. Hearing the sound in the distance, the expression in the snow girl's eyes didn't change. She flew in that direction with her 2 small hands behind her back. Jing Jiu and Hua Shi in the ice block were guided by an invisible force, following her at a moderate distance. The huge battleship hovered in the same spot. The distance between them grew shorter. Even in such a vast and empty universe, the atmosphere was getting more and more intense. The ascended immortals were all powerful swordsmen, and they were no less powerful than the secret agents who had appeared on the moon-gazing planet. Even though the battleships had turned into coffins, they were still equipped with the most advanced weapons of the Federation of the Milky Way and had more preparations. The Snow Girl had been in a state of exhaustion after killing the 9 secret agents, and she felt a bit weak. Could she kill 6 more of them that day? The immortals spread out, forming a formation vaguely. This formation was much more powerful than the one used to activate the base of the plasma cannon. It exuded a pure energy, as if it would materialize out of thin air in the dark universe. Chenya stood on the same spot, where the center of the formation was located. The stone pestle had been retrieved a long time ago. He picked up the other end of the green rope with his right hand and fixed his gaze on Jingjiu behind the snow girl. He pulled the rope with all his might. Jingjiu could sense the cold yet hot, emotionless yet eager gaze, but he didn't know why. After a long while, the snow girl flew to the front of the large formation formed by the immortals, and then made a strange gesture. Her body leaned back slightly, as if she were about to fall down. Chenya and the other immortals were nervous and confused, wondering what she was doing. Hua Shi snorted in the ice cube. Only she understood what the snow girl meant. There was no north, south, east, or west in the universe, and there was no up and down. The snow girl leaned back, looking down at the immortals. She looked down at the immortals and uttered a cry. Hearing this cry, Chenya and the other immortals activated their fairy energy and prepared to launch the most powerful attack, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Jingjiu reached out his hand and held the luggage floating in the space tightly to his chest. Hua Shi frowned slightly. She held the ice wall with her hand and adjusted her posture to ensure that she wouldn't bump into the wall too painfully. A moment later, the snow girl and Jingjiu suddenly disappeared from the original spot. The ice cube also disappeared with them. A straight white line appeared in the dark universe. Chapter 983. Chenya turned around as fast as he could, watching as the white line passed through more than 1,000 warships and disappeared into the other side of the universe. By the time the other immortals reacted and looked in that direction, they could only see the remnants of the white line. They were silent, unable to dispel the shock in their hearts for a long time. What kind of speed was that? And Her Majesty actually escaped? One of the immortals couldn't hold back his strong confusion and asked, "Wouldn't the humans in the ice be turned into dust? No matter how fast Her Majesty could fly, how far could she go without a nuclear furnace? Aren't they afraid of getting lost in the deep space?" Chen said expressionlessly, "She doesn't need energy, and she doesn't need to get close to the celestial bodies. Negative entropy is just a hypothesis, or even an illusion. Could it be real?" A black-clothed immortal demonic beast said with a trembling voice, "If that's the case, then she only needs to stay in the universe to become stronger and stronger. How could humans escape from her rule?" Chen didn't answer this question because he couldn't. The outer space outside the gray passage was extremely quiet. Not a single sound could be heard from the more than 1,000 warships and the lonely transfer station. These warships and the 6 immortals were all here to kill the Queen of Snowy Kingdom and capture Jingjiu. No matter how one thought about it, this should be a magnificent and tragic battle, but who knew that it would end so suddenly and nothingness? It was like stepping on empty air, like walking to the end of the path only to return to the beginning. It was like reading a story only to find that the hero woke up to find that it was just a dream. No one liked this feeling. This feeling of nothingness was very uncomfortable. As the people involved, it was even easier for them to develop extreme self-loathing. The immortals looked at each other and understood each other's feelings. The black-clothed immortal demonic beast mumbled, "Do you think Her Majesty will think that we are all fools when she sees our formation?" A female immortal in purple said with a slightly confused expression, "We are fools to begin with." The black-clothed immortal demonic beast sighed emotionally. "When humans think, God laughs. The ancients were not deceiving us." The other black-clothed immortal demonic beast had been cultivating with him for thousands of years and knew that he had such a sentimental temperament, so he sighed helplessly. "If there really is a God, she won't laugh at our thinking. She will only think that we are bored and ignore us." Chen said expressionlessly, "Just like her." The immortals were silent for a long time as they thought about the white line that had casually left. "What do we do next?" someone asked. Chen tied the green rope to his wrist and made a simple flower. He said, "We must find her." The pessimistic demonic immortal in black said, "The universe is so vast, and she doesn't need the fairy aura. How can she find her?" Chen made sure that the end of the rope was tied tightly and loosened the remaining 2 fingers on his right hand. "No matter how weak she is now or where she will go to heal, they will still have to go to the homeworld. We will just wait there." The ancestral planet was on the other side of the Hyene Nebula. It was extremely far away from here, and one would have to pass through several space tunnels in between. When they left the battleship, they all brought nuclear power furnaces with them, which could provide an endless source of energy. But how could they pass through those spatial passages? An immortal said, "Why don't we try driving a warship? Maybe the self-destruction rule is just a bluff?" "There's no need to try. If we can't find the awakening signal, then no one will be able to open those warships," someone said. "What should we do next? Are we just going to stay here?" The pessimistic demonic immortal in black said. Ascenders were indeed powerful. To normal humans, they were no different from deities. In fact, on their own planets, they often played the role of gods, deities, and Buddhas. However, any greatness in the vast universe would be like ink falling into the sea. It would be quickly diluted. Without the transcendence of modern civilization, gods, deities, and Buddhas would only be the local overlords of that planet. Immortals without warships were like Lu Ci without a sword. They could not go far. First, we need to find the awakening signal. The central computer is already controlled by those brats. How are you going to get it? What's going on over at the main planet? Qing Shuang is staying there to keep an eye on Zhao Liu and the planetary defense system. I told you that you are not vigilant enough against that cat demon. Think about how many disasters those ancient divine beasts have brought. Chen Yi gestured for them to stop talking nonsense. He looked at the transfer station not far away and said, "Civilian low-speed spaceships should not have the self-destruction clause. Let's go there and see if we can contact anyone." Wow, those people have cannons! That was close. It's okay. The Snow Girl has been taken care of. Why did they leave? That's right. It's easy to be targeted if they stay in the warship. What should we do if Chun Ye and the others go to the transfer station? Zhao Lei sat by the hot spring and looked at the light screen in the fog. Listening to Qing Er's nagging, her eyebrows were about to fly up. She finally controlled her emotions and asked, "Have you found the method I asked you to find?" "No. Logically speaking, it should be some special program that controls the Snow Girl, but there is no trace of it in the database." Qing Er said with some embarrassment, "Also, I haven't found a way to bypass the physical operation authorization." Zhao Lei looked around and said expressionlessly, "Find the physical operation authorization as soon as possible." She was obviously lying when she was in the mecha. The method to control the Snow Girl can be a little slower, but it still needs to be in our hands. Lying by her side, Ada gazed at the sky above the mountains through the fog. He was unusually quiet and obedient. It was because he was too tired today. It was not something an ordinary cat could do to crush the gravitational field. After the gravitational field was broken, the mountains, the lake, and the hot spring were all exposed to the outside world. The people of this world would arrive soon. Zhao Lei wanted Qing Er to find the physical operation authorization as soon as possible in order to solve the following problems. A light transport spacecraft appeared in the atmosphere in the distance as the violent wind blew up the remaining snow. In the next moment, hundreds of armed mechas of various types arrived among the mountains. Many splashing sounds could be heard on the surface of the lake. It was unclear how many swordsmen of the praying hall and the elite soldiers of the military were on their way here. Zhao Lei had no intention of leaving. She reached out her hand and stroked Ada to soothe his anxiety, in case too many people would die later. It didn't take long before the military and the praying hall completed the encirclement of the hot spring and the buildings. Ran Donglu and a few high-ranking officials of the government pushed open the door and walked to the opposite side of the hot spring. The reaction of the praying hall was much more intense. A few cardinal preachers and the candidate priests flew to the top of the hot spring and yelled from above, "Where is that person? What have you done?" Hundreds of mechas in the sky raised their mechanical arms and aimed at the edge of the hot spring with all kinds of weapons. A young woman was still sitting by the edge of the hot spring, but she was no longer that person. Ada glanced at the hot spring in bewilderment, wondering if that person was at the bottom of the water and they wanted to fish her out and dry her before assembling her. Ran Donglu raised his hand to signal for everybody to be quiet. He said to Zhao Lei, "I've pretended to be deaf and dumb since I learned about the existence of the cocoon breakers many years ago, until I received the decree from that person. It's because we humans who have been living among the stars don't want to know the truth. We can live in peace with you people, and it doesn't matter if we are led in secret. And this situation has been going on for many years. I believe that my family and I have shown you enough respect during this period of time. Why do you want to break the peace then?" Zhao Lei said calmly to him, "I need your civilization." Jing Zhou had said something similar. The reason was different, but the request was the same. However, Jing Zhou intended to inherit the human civilization through the approval of that young woman at the time, but Zhao Lei wanted to seize this civilization more directly. It was then that another spaceship landed from the sky. The light battleship and the thousands of mechas in the mountains didn't fire. It was because Ran Donglu didn't give the order, and everybody could see clearly that the spaceship belonged to the Ran family. Ran Handong, Zhong Lizi and Jiang Yuxia walked out from the spaceship and stood behind Zhao Lei. The main preachers and priests had a slight change of expression on their faces. They looked at Ran Donglu reflexively, in an attempt to figure out why. Zhao Liu stood up while holding Ada in her arms. "Surrender. I don't want to kill all of you," she said while looking at the people on the other side of the hot spring. After a moment of silence, Ran Donglu said, "The reason our priest sect could survive until now and cooperate with those cocoon breakers is not entirely because of our self-control, but also because we have a modern technological civilization. The human battleships are powerful enough to flatten this planet. Even if you killed us, it would be meaningless. I think you don't want to see the end of the world like that. Those scenes won't happen. It's because all the battleships are under my control," said Zhao Liu. Upon hearing this, the priests and main preachers didn't believe it. It was as if they were looking at a crazy person. The two generals by Ran Donglu's side had a terrible look on their faces. It was because they had confirmed not long ago that they had lost contact with the battleships of the three major fleets and the guarding fleets of the various galaxies, and they were nowhere to be found on the star maps and positioning systems, as if they had vanished into thin air. The main planet of the Federation of the Milky Way had experienced too many events that day. First of all, the sudden explosions and attacks had caused the light rays outside the atmosphere to be exceedingly complicated, even more so than the bright permanent star. Then, about 10% of the populace saw the white cat descending from the sky with their own eyes. Later, everybody saw the white cat through the TV news, the internet, and various other methods. Then, they heard the thunder coming from the distant north and felt the quaking of the earth. The whole planet was plunged into chaos as a result. The populace ran and screamed as they left the buildings, fleeing toward the underground fortifications. The satellites and the space stations outside the atmosphere were in darkness for a short while, and then everything went back to normal. Under the command of the central computer, the chaos was still under control. The populace who had fled to the underground fortifications were gathered in various evacuation halls, and the populace who hadn't had time to leave returned to their homes according to the instructions on their wristbands. During this process, many people noticed some very strange things. For example, some automatic equipment suddenly became disobedient, some robots suddenly stopped what they were doing, and some self-heating coffee machines refused to put sugar in them. But the strangest thing was, of course, that all the news channels, online forums, and virtual communities all turned into the same image at a certain moment. The group of mountains looked so magnificent and beautiful, but why did they look so strange? They had never seen them in the geography classes or in the sightseeing films. Where was the city behind the lake? Why did it exude a sense of retro style? And did those cars use the bioboil? Why were the buildings behind the hot springs so beautiful? Why were the meccas of the military everywhere? What were those important figures of the praying hall doing? The scenes had gradually spread from the main planet to the other parts of the planet, occupying the TV sets of all the households, and all the online forums and virtual communities displayed the same scene, eliciting many surprised screams and conjectures. In the distant Stargate base and Show City, the permission to lock down the Stargate Resort Hotel was revoked. The populace in the underground neighborhood let out the loudest screams. It was because they saw the familiar-looking girl with short hair and Zhong Lizi behind her. The whole Federation of the Milky Way saw the scene by the hot spring and the short-haired girl holding the white cat. The populace on the main planet had just experienced a terrifying and exciting experience that day, so they recognized the white cat as soon as they saw it. "That's the cat. It's a devil. How come it has become so small? Is it a monster of the sea of dark matter? If the white cat with long hair was the devil descending from the sky, who was the short-haired girl holding the devil? I know her. In the assembly point of the Luoyun station of the second subway line of Capital City, the crowd was too nervous to utter a word while looking at the light screen. All of a sudden, the surprised and bewildered voice of a youth burst out in the crowd. In the next moment, a few more voices burst out in the assembly points and apartment buildings in Capital City. Those young men and women, who were unwilling to put down the hoverboards even if they had to flee for their lives, looked at Zhao Liu on the screen and thought of the scenes on the square on the street in front of the building of the military headquarters that night. They felt an indescribable sense of pride in addition to feeling shocked. It was then that Zhao Liu heard the proud voice of Qing Er. She said to Ran Donglu, "I can say that the whole world is under my control now." What she had said earlier was that all the battleships of the Federation of the Milky Way were under her control, but the scope of her control extended to the whole world. The world referred to all the objects and relationships in the world. Nobody believed what she said. Ran Donglu furrowed his brows as well. Zhao Liu looked at the mechas in the sky. Those mechas dropped down like raindrop. End of this chapter. Chapter 984. Bam! 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 Countless heavy crashing sounds could be heard from the mountains and the lakeside. The mechas lost all their propulsion. Some of them fell off the cliffs, and some fell into the lake, creating a great splash. The scene became chaotic. The life-saving devices were activated, and the swordsmen of the military and the praying hall climbed out of the mechas. Fortunately, they were not wounded too severely. The eerie scene was witnessed by the crowd, and it was also shown on all the TV screens in the Federation of the Milky Way. "Look, I can do it!" Zhao Liu pulled back her gaze and said to Ran Donglu, "Those battleships are like coffins now. Though the life-saving system can last a long time, nobody can guarantee that the humans on the battleships won't have any problems under such pressure. Maybe some of them will collapse, and some of them will try to take over the command of the captain and open the battleships from the inside." Ran Donglu remained silent. If the battleships in a state of absolute silence were opened forcibly, they would explode themselves. If more than 100,000 battleships exploded in the space one by one, how magnificent would it be? The resources and wisdom accumulated over the years since the rebirth of the human civilization would be destroyed in a day? Nobody could bear such a responsibility. The two military generals, many swordsmen of the military and the praying hall, and some main preachers and priests all fell silent like Ran Donglu. The cardinal in red suddenly exclaimed sternly, "This is all a deception. You're not a god, it's impossible. If Jing Jiu can't become the new god, I'll do it." Before he could finish his words, Zhao Liu said to the main preacher expressionlessly, "The two backup systems have been shut down, and only the main system of that planet is under my control. That one has already perished. Are you sure you want to be buried with her?" Most of the people present couldn't understand what she meant, but the cardinal in red and Ran Donglu vaguely knew the truth. The expression on Ran Donglu's face grew graver, and the expression on the cardinal in red's face grew crazier, yelling, "I don't believe it." Having said that, he dashed toward the hot spring. Then, he flew out. He was like a stone that fell into a courtyard in the distance and died there. The surprised screams broke out again, but it didn't cause a greater commotion, and nobody took advantage of the chaos to attack. Because the one who killed the cardinal was not Zhao Liu. Ran Donglu withdrew his right hand, looked at Zhao Liu, and said solemnly, "I pledge allegiance to you on behalf of the administrative main planet." Though he was an important figure in the Federation of the Milky Way, he could only represent the main planet, not the other administrative regions. When the three major fleets were frozen in space, it was meaningless for him to represent the military. But that was enough. Zhao Liu raised her right hand and gestured for Qing Er to turn off the live broadcast. On the other side of the distant gray passage, a large hole had appeared on the surface of the lonely transit base. It looked like the sealed door had been torn open by some powerful force. More than 10 staff members of the transit base were quarantined in the living area, their faces pale with fright. The backup life support system had been activated, so they did not need to worry about dying immediately. However, what kind of monsters were those people? Chen Ye and the other immortals stood in the empty hall, watching the television screen in silence. Earlier, as Zhao Leia took a look at the sky, those mechas fell down one after another. Now the television screen had disappeared, and the program had returned to normal or the expressions on the faces of the broadcasters. Chen Yi said in the communication system, "Hello, spirit of the green sky mirror. I'd like to talk to the immortal Lei." After a moment of silence in the communication system, Qing Er's timid voice rang out, You wait a moment. I don't know if she will answer the call." It didn't take long before the voice of Zhao Liu appeared in the communication system. "Do you people want to surrender?" Chen Yi said expressionlessly, "You can destroy the 3 major fleets and kill all the humans, but you can't kill us. I'm not Taiping Jinren, unless it's absolutely necessary." Zhao Liu's voice was devoid of any emotion. "As for you people, you're no longer a threat to me, so I have no need to negotiate with you." Chen Yi said, "I think you lack respect and understanding of the seniors like us. You people have ascended and left Chaotian, so you are of course very powerful. The problem is that you people don't have any battleships right now, so you have no choice but to find a space station or a planet to live on. You're like a farmer without a horse. You can't even climb over a mountain in front of you." Zhao Lei continued, "You people came to this world earlier than me, but you still don't know what the biggest problem in this world is until now." The pessimistic devil man in black couldn't help but ask, "What is it?" "It's the distance." Zhao Liu exited the conversation after saying this. All the battleships and flying devices in the Federation of the Milky Way, as long as they were in the network of the Charter, had turned into coffins or rocks, staying in various places of the universe lifelessly, waiting anxiously to be awakened or to die. One battleship was an exception, which was the Scorching Sun battleship. Lu Shui didn't contact Zhao Liu directly. Instead, he entered the game as usual and notified her. The monkeys on the Shima Peak were screaming, and the clouds were drifting over at the foot of the cliff. Zhao Liu walked out from the manor cave. "Is she safe?" Lu Shui asked as soon as he saw her. Zhao Liu was aware that he was not concerned about her, but about the soldiers and populace on those battleships and flying devices. Ran Handong has installed a backdoor in the program. "Even if there is no awakening signal, she will be safe," she said. Lu Shui couldn't believe what she said, saying, "The huge battleship outside the passage of Jia has more than 70,000 evacuees on board, as well as other civilian flying devices. I hope you can lift the ban as soon as possible. It's best if not too many people die." Zhao Liu was fully aware that she would be nagged to death if she didn't agree to his request. "Okay," she said without hesitation. The expression on Lu Shui's face grew gentler as he said, "Send my regards to Ada and Qing." "I haven't received any news from Tong Yen," Zhao Liu said. Lu Shui said, "Then I have no choice but to do it myself. I'm too far away from here. I'll try to take care of it first." By the time the Snow Girl and Jingjiu came out from the passage of Jialei, the Scorching Sun battleship had already turned around, heading toward a distant sun. After a moment of silence, Zhao Liu said, "Maybe he would prefer to take care of it himself." "He is an idiot now," said Lu Shui. Zhao Liu let out a rare smile, reminding him, "The planetary defense system of the ancestral planet is very strong. You should be careful." They were all aware that Jingjiu was in a bad situation. To solve this problem, they had to kill the great Grandmaster of Aoyama. The Snow Girl and Jingjiu would definitely go there as well. The ancestral planet was the place where the final answer lay. In the Federation of the Milky Way, the existence and specific location of the ancestral planet had always been a secret. However, it was no longer a secret to them because of the existence of Tong Yen. Lu Shui walked to the edge of the cliff and looked at the peaks above the ocean of clouds, the expression in his eyes suddenly changing. Qingrong Peak was not far away, and Shirue Peak and Shilai Peak were joined together in the distance. The Shangda Peak in the game hadn't leveled out yet, and the Hermit Peaks were still there. Tianguang Peak was still as high as before. The peaks of Aoyama and everything in between them originated from the great Grandmaster of Aoyama. He was the highest peak in Aoyama. Jingjiu might have surpassed his height, but he was forced to the point where he couldn't wake up. Could they, the younger generation, defeat this peak? Hundreds of armed mechas were scattered in the mountains and lakes, unable to be activated, turning into a pile of scrap metal. The sporadic gunshots and laser beams pierced through the forest, but they soon died down. The armed guards of the praying hall were dismantled gradually, and the hot spring regained its tranquility. Ran Donglu and 2 military generals walked over. Seeing the scene, the main preachers, priests and regular soldiers were shocked beyond words. Even Zhong Lizi and Jiang Yuxia found it hard to believe that Ran Donglu's attitude and stance had changed so abruptly that it was hard for them to imagine. Was it possible that all the important figures were decisive fence-sitters? The situation was under control. Zhao Lei didn't say anything to Ran Donglu. She walked to the back of the building while holding the cat. Ran Handong arched her eyebrows at her father and followed her hastily. Ran Donglu let out a faint smile, his eyes full of affection. Seeing this, Zhong Lizi and Jiang Yuxia felt even more baffled. The silvery streamlined spaceship rose up from the back of the building, heading toward Capital City after breaking through the remaining snow in the sky. Countless ripples formed on the surface of the hot spring, resembling the mood of the people at the moment, and then the ripples subsided. The remaining snow after the collapse of the gravitational field landed on the windows of the spaceship, making pa sounds like the rainstorm on a summer night. Ran Handong turned on the sound barrier and brought out the information in her bracelet, reporting, "The joint conference will begin in 20 minutes. The key is how to deal with those battleships. It's impossible to keep them locked in the space forever." She was a competent secretary or advisor in every aspect, regardless of whether she treated Jing Jiu or Zhao Lei. Zhao Lei said, "The time is too short, and the people on the battleships are not fearful enough. Let's wait until the conference is over." Ran Handong nodded and asked, "Do you need to see the information of the participants of the joint conference?" Zhao Lei said, "It's just a routine notice. The conference itself is of no significance." Though Ran Handong didn't agree with Zhao Lei's suggestion, she couldn't convince Zhao Lei. Thinking of the unexpected event that day, she couldn't help but ask, "How did you know that person has left here?" Only when that person had left would Zhao Lei have a chance to isolate the main planet and obtain the control of the central computer. But how did she know that? How could she grasp the timing so accurately? Zhao Lei said, "It's because Jingjiu has shown up." Ran Handong didn't fully understand the logic of this statement, but Zhong Lizi and Jiang Yuxia understood what Zhao Lei meant. It was because the two of them knew Jingjiu's temperament and behavior better than Zhao Lei did. Zhao Lei didn't need to know the exact situation of that girl. As long as she saw Jingjiu, she knew it was time to strike back. If they weren't confident that they could isolate the girl from the central computer and the charter network, Jingjiu wouldn't dare show up in front of the world given his cautious and cowardly behavior. This cooperation was not planned in advance. The tacit understanding between them was indeed amazing. Zhao Lei and Jingjiu hadn't seen each other for more than 500 years, and they had never fought side by side. However, the tacit understanding between the two of them was better than the tacit understanding between them and Lu Shisui and Tong Yen. This was probably the so-called telepathy. The spaceship had already flown out of the mountains in the north and arrived in a sunny world. Ran Handong opened the protective screen. The bright blue sky and the bright sunlight shone in through the window and shone on Zhao Lei's face. Her seemingly ordinary and elegant face, under the illumination of the light, faintly exuded a sense of holiness. Ran Handong was taken aback for a moment before she pressed, Why did you broadcast the news live then? The populace of the Federation of the Milky Way had all witnessed the scenes of the Meccas falling down like the raindrops, the indignant expressions on the faces of the main preachers and priests of the praying hall, and the fresh blood. This might serve as a show of power, but for the vast majority of humans, the deaths and conflicts in the distance were hardly frightening. On the contrary, they were more likely to be excited, because they were safe. This is not a message to them. Zhao Leo's answer was still concise. Regardless of what they were doing, it was important to communicate information quickly and smoothly. In doing so, they wouldn't make a wrong judgment and cause problems in the cooperation. The game, The Path Toward Heaven, had such a function. In comparison to Jingjiu's steady style of doing things, Zhao Leo's method was simpler and more direct, or in other words, more brutal. All she needed was a live broadcast of the news to send the message to every corner of the Federation of the Milky Way. No matter where the Snow Girl and Jingjiu went, they would surely see the news and know that she had already controlled the central computer and this world. On the other hand, she hoped that Tong Yen, who had disappeared for some reason, would also see the news and not do anything devious or crazy when she knew the victory was close at hand. Ding! Ran Handong received a message. She uttered a few times before saying, "Okay, father." She said to Zhao Leu, "I have obtained the physical keys of a few experimental bases. My big brother has taken control of the fourth backup." Zhao Leu uttered Zhong Lizi had felt that something was amiss. Hearing this conversation, she couldn't help but ask curiously, "Has your family always been on our side?" "Of course," said Ran Handong with a faint smile. Zhong Lizi exclaimed in surprise, "Grandmaster Rant's pain and reluctance in the beginning were all feigned? I didn't expect my father to be so good at acting," said Ran Handong with a smile. Jiang Yuxia remarked sentimentally, "It looks like my uncle is right. The politicians are all experienced actors." The 2 layers of protective shields on the main planet had been greatly affected by the dancing laser beams and particle beams, the sudden explosion, and the white devil cat falling down from the sky. It wasn't until now that they had started to repair themselves. The concentrated stars and the rays of the sun of the solar system shone on the surface of the planet more than usual. In less than 20 minutes, the average temperature of the northern hemisphere facing the sun had increased by 1 degree Celsius in this season. If the situation continued, the humans could still rely on the thermostatic equipment to live, but the animals in the field would have a hard time. The glaciers in the north would melt faster, and the housing prices in the cities along the coast would deteriorate faster than the glaciers. The light from the stars illuminated the space stations and satellites outside the atmosphere. Those space stations and satellites were all locked, looking like the space tombstones erected by the military for the heroes. The surface of the buildings in Capital City was illuminated by the bright light. However, the empty streets had nothing to do with the dazzling light and the hot weather. It was because the authorities on the main planet had issued the strictest martial law. The silvery spaceship flew over the small square and garden in the street, where Zhao Leu often played with the hoverboard. That day, no one could see the enthusiastic followers of Shen Yunmai, the ancient dresses, or the cheerful laughter of the young men and women. The only thing that could be seen were the wilted flowers, their heads lowered listlessly. In the distance in front of the square in the middle of the street stood an irregular huge building. It was the military building of the Federation of the Milky Way. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.